Here we are once again diving into the history of Tartaria. And in this series, we're going to be looking at their religion and if there's any parallels between the Empire of Tartaria and the Bible and perhaps the book of Revelation. So to kick things off here in episode 1, let's get started with this book called Purchase His Pilgrims in 5 books. The first containing the voyages by ancient kings, patriarchs, apostles, and philosophers and others to the more remote parts of the known world, inquiries into their languages and religions, and especially of the modern diversified professions of Christianity. Here on page 309, the history of Aten or Anthony the Armenian of Asia, and especially touching on the Tartars, of the kingdom of Cathay and the diverse and other provinces of Asia, and the first habitation of the Tartars, and of the Kangas or Chinggis in his beginnings. And this appears to be talking about Genghis Khan, who was born sometime around 1158. That date might be wrong. We're going to come back to that shortly. But where it speaks of the first habitation of the Tartars and of Kangas or Chinggis, his beginnings, this is the beginnings of Genghis Khan. And it's talking about the kingdom of Cathay, which is the greatest that is found in the world and is replenished with people and infinite riches, being situated on the shore of the ocean sea. This kingdom of Cathay is, of course, in the kingdom of Tartaria. Here's a map of Tartaria. We will notice that the men on bows who travel on horse are wearing blue, red, and yellow. But if we look up here on the ocean shore, just south of Tinduk, we will see Cathay. And so this is a region in Tartaria that appears on this map south of Tinduk. This is a map of Christianity, and here's Tinduk, which there are many Christians. And that's interesting. There's a lot of Christians in Tinduk. Cathay should be just south of here. I don't see it on this map. But very interesting that we find many Christians in Tinduk, because Tinduk is the same area right up here where we find Arzareth. Now, Tinduk looks like it's maybe misplaced a bit on this map. It's down here in this case, but on almost all maps of Tartaria, you'll find Tinduk in this northeastern corner up here, and it's always on the ocean, just as described in the book. Tinduk up here in the same exact area where we find Arzareth. And Arzareth is the area for Esdras. And this is where the lost 10 tribes of Israel are driven out of Israel. They were brought to the other side of the Euphrates River, and they were led captive to another land. For they had deliberated among themselves, they had taken a counsel, and they would leave the multitude of peoples and go to an inner region where they had never, the race of men, had dwelt. That there also they would keep the law which they had not kept in their own land, and they entered through a narrow passage in the Euphrates River. For the Most High then made a miracle for them, where he held back the source of the river until they had passed over. So this is very similar to when Moses and the crossing of the Red Sea. Here God has also held back the river so that they can pass over, that they might proceed to the dry land. And it was a great way to go. A journey of 1.5 years, and the region was called Arsaf, at the end of the world. And this is Arsaf, correctly called Arzareth, or another land from Deuteronomy. And they have dwelt there until the last time, or they will dwell there until the last time, when they will come back again. And the Most High will again hold back the source of the river Euphrates, that they might pass over. So God's going to hold back the river so that they can return. From the Jewish encyclopedia, Arzareth, the name of the land beyond the great river, far from the habitation of man, where the 10 tribes will dwell, observing the laws of Moses until the time of the restoration. So that area of land is located in Tartaria right here. Then the text here in Latin says the Arzareth. Here are the 10 tribes retreated and changed from the Tartar area to Scythia. And since then they are called Goths or Gothans, confirming God's highest glory. And here lies the splendid kingdom of Cathay, the Tartar or Tartar area to Scythia. And since then they are called Goths or Gothans, confirming God's highest glory. And here lies the splendid kingdom of Cathay. So in Arzareth, where the 10 tribes went, is where the splendid kingdom of Cathay resides. And it says here about Argon that this is a Christian kingdom known to Prester John. So it appears that the lost 10 tribes of Israel are a Christian group of people, not necessarily following Judaism, but they're Christians. And specifically, when we look at a map of Christianity, this area of Tinduk, there's many Christians. And going on from there, some Christians, a lot of Christianity in Asia and Tartaria, but specifically focused around the area of Tinduk, where the lost 10 tribes of Israel are at. So a few things we know about Cathay is that it is the home of the 10 tribes of Israel, because according to 4 Esdras, the race of men had never dwelt there before. And the lost 10 tribes are the first ones to come into this area. And from there, we have Christianity spreading to the rest of Asia. So back to Purchas his Pilgrims, when it's talking about the kingdom of Cathay and the greatest to be found in the world, this is a Tartarian kingdom, and it is the kingdom of the lost 10 tribes of Israel. In the kingdom of Cathay, there are many marvelous and monstrous things which I forbear to mention. The inhabitants of those parts are exceedingly wise, replenished with all kinds of skill and cunning, insomuch that they disdain the endeavors of all their nations in all kinds of art and science, saying that they only see with 2 eyes, but the Latins see only with 1 eye, and all other nations are blind. Interesting that the Tartarians say that they see with 2 eyes, and that everybody else only sees with 1 eye. I would assume this is a reference to the physical eye and the parietal eye inside of the brain, which is the pineal gland. But it seems the Tartarians are saying that they see with both of their eyes, of course, and the other people of the world only see with their physical eyes, that all other nations are blind. And the Tartarians seem to disagree with the other nations' sciences. And they think that they're, they disdain the endeavors of the other nations and their sciences. And they're exceedingly sharp-sighted in exercise of all bodily works and labors. Of this kingdom of Cathay, it is said that it is the beginning of the world, because the head thereof is in the east, and there is not known any other nation to inhabit more easternly thereabouts. Once again, the location seems to be correct, as Tinduk and Cathay are basically as far east as you can go, of course, without crossing over the Bering Strait and going into America. In the kingdom of Tarsa and 3 provinces whose rulers are also called kings, the men of that country have always worshipped idols. Yet there is an exception, that 10 kindreds of those kings who are guiding of a star came to worship the nativity in Bethlehem, Judah. And there are yet found many great and noble among the Tartarians of that race, which hold firmly to the faith of Christ. So it sounds as though the kings, the 3 kings who followed the star to worship Jesus Christ when he was born in Bethlehem, are Tartarians, and that they still hold firmly to their faith in Christ. And he goes on to describe a lot of the areas around here. Of course, the kingdom of Tarsa, the kingdom of Turkestan, the kingdom of Korsamians, the kingdom of Cumania, and all the way down to India. And here is the land of Armenia and the kingdom of Georgia. And in the kingdom of Georgia is a marvelous, strange wonder or miracle, which I would not have reported or believed if I would have not seen it with my own eyes. But because I have personally been there and been made an eyewitness thereof, I can say that in those parts there is a province or country called Handsome. It's about 3 days' journey, and the whole extent is all covered over with such thick and palpable darkness that nobody can see anything therein. Neither do they dare go into their land, because they know that they won't be able to find their way out again. Those that inhabit near it affirm that they have often heard the sound of men's voice crying, of cocks crowing, and of the neighing of horses in the wood. And because of the course of the river and things they see coming down the river, it appears that there's certain signs that there are people inhabiting therein. Now, supposedly this is Georgia, which is right down here between the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea, very close to Turkey. And 3 days journey, of course, is not going to get you where there's to the North Pole where there's darkness. So it's definitely not talking about any type of North Pole or South Pole darkness. This is some kind of a supernatural darkness that's taken over apparently some area around here in Georgia. Revelation chapter 16 verse 10 says, "The fifth angel poured out his bowl on the throne of the beast, and its kingdom was plunged into darkness. People gnawed their tongues in agony and cursed God of heaven because of their pains and their sores, but they refused to repent of what they had done." So in Revelation, there is a supernatural darkness where people are gnawing their tongues in agony. And in the kingdom of Georgia, there is a supernatural darkness, a marvelous, strange wonder or miracle with palpable darkness, and you can't see anything therein. And there's the sound of men's voices crying. And to double check, in Revelations, it says that when he poured out his bowl, the throne of the beast and its kingdom was plunged into darkness. So just one throne or one kingdom was plunged into darkness. Seems to align with the one kingdom in Georgia that's having a supernatural darkness. In the country in which the Tartarians first inhabited lies beyond the great mountain Belgian Minton in the histories of Alexander. And they lived like a brutish people without learning or religion, feeding herds of beasts and going from place to place to seek pasture. And not being exercised in arms, they were despised by other nations. And in ancient time there were many nations which by common name were called Mogli. Probably this is where the Mongolians came from. Who upon their increase were divided into 7 principal sorts. And the first of the nation was called the Tartar. And from the name of the province where they first inhabited. And the second was Tangur. The third was Kunat. And the fourth, Talir. The fifth, Sonich. And the sixth, Monghi. And the seventh, Tibet. So the Tartarians are broken up into 7 different kingdoms. And according to Alexander, they are Gog and Magog. The book of Revelation is written from John to these 7 churches of Asia. Or you could say John to the 7 churches of Tartaria. So it's possible that the 7 churches of Asia, or the 7 churches of Tartaria, are in fact the 7 nations of the Tartarians. Now in Revelation chapter 20, it talks about the 1,000-year reign of Christ. When the 1,000 years are over, Satan will be released from his prison and will go out to deceive the nations in the 4 corners of the earth, Gog and Magog, to gather them for battle. Now this Gog and Magog, according to Alexander, it says here that the country in which the Tartarians first inhabited lies beyond the great mountain Belgian mentioned in the histories of Alexander. Alexander says that these Tartarians are Gog and Magog. In this book, Disquisitions of the Antipapal Spirit, it speaks of the Tartars who did the most astounding things, but those people had been shut up in the mountains of Gog and Magog by Alexander the Great. And Gog and Magog, of course, is mentioned in the book of Revelation. And they remained there until the year 1202. And here we have one explanation of why the Tartarians have an owl on their flag. But we will also get a second story of that shortly. Alexander had placed large trumpets certain distances from each other on the mountains, and whenever the wind blew, it sent forth blasts of war, and for 10 centuries, I don't know if that number is correct, but these cunning Tartars continued to believe that Alexander was stationed behind them because the trumpets were blowing, and at last the owls built some nests in the mouths of the trumpets, and they were silent. So when the Tartars, summoning up their courage, they climbed up to the summit of the mountain, they saw the trumpets, which had, of course, the owl's nest in them, and they decided that they would leave their place of concealment and disperse themselves as conquerors into many countries, and from that time they've held the owl in great honor. But of this we are certain, that the whole legend of the trumpets on the hills of Gog and Magog are the effect of the wind upon them, together with the account of the owls who, closing the trumpet's mouth, delivered the Tartars from their causeless fears. And that's one story as to why the Tartars revere the owl. But we have a whole different story about why they have the owl on their flag here shortly. But looking into Alexander's account, Iskander, or Alexander's Dike, or the Dike of Gog and Magog, is the name of a vast rampart said to have been built by Alexander the Great to defend his dominions from the incursions of the wild northern tribes. The idea was probably derived from some confused account of the Great Wall of China. So this Great Wall, supposedly built by Alexander to keep the Gog and Magog, or the lost 10 tribes, out of their, out of the country. It may be the Great Wall of China, which here is the Great Wall, of course, keeping the lost 10 tribes from coming further south to spread their Christianity, it seems like. And here we have Cathay, this large region of Cathay, of course, on the coast. And the Great Wall of China would continue on to the coast, and eventually the Great Wall of China is just the southern border of Cathay. So, it seems that maybe this Great Wall, supposedly the one that Alexander took credit for building, was built to keep the 10 tribes of Israel from spreading out into the world. The Red Jews, anti-Semitism in the apocalyptic age, the unclean peoples of Gog and Magog at the beginning of the Common Era. Jewish historian Josephus wrote that Alexander closed the iron gates at the mountain pass through which the Scyths, or Tartarians, might break into the civilized world. In another work, he identifies the Scyths or Tartarians with Magog. Fisher claims that the legend of Alexander's Gate, having been built to enclose Gog and Magog, was of Jewish origin and came from 1st century Alexandria, based on earlier Jewish stories of Alexander as a hero of Jewish history. So the Jews, of course, are the tribes of Benjamin and Judah, who were not lost. Those are, of the 12 tribes of Israel, the 2 who are not lost are the Jews, and the 10 who got lost became Tartarians. So the Israelites were the 12 sons of the biblical patriarch Jacob, and Jacob's 12 sons are the 12 tribes of Israel. 10 of those tribes are lost. 2 of them aren't. So the 10 who get lost are Reuben, Simon, Dan, Naphtali, Gad, Asher, Issachar, Zebulun, Manasseh, and Ephraim. But the 2 who are not lost are Judah and Benjamin. So the tribes of Judah and Benjamin would go on to become the Jews. Of course, Judah, the Jews, and it seems as though the other 10 tribes would go on to become Christians. They were called Jews. After that, Judah and Benjamin, which for the unity of minds were, as it were, one tribe. And so the one tribe of Judah and Benjamin are called the Jews. The other 10 breaking off, and what became of those 10 tribes? The Jews acknowledged themselves to be ignorant. So the tribe of Judah and Benjamin claimed to be ignorant, but that's not true. Only some rabbis think them to be in Tartaria. The only reason which I have heard them allege for their opinion is because they often understand by Tartarians who come from there, that there are many amongst them called by Hebrew names to this day. Now, these ones are practiced in Judaism, and these ones are practiced in Christianity. So it seems as though these guys came up with the story of Alexander, trying to lock these guys out of basically being able to return to Jerusalem and return to Israel. So the legend of Alexander's Gate being built to enclose Gog and Magog was of Jewish origin. In other words, the Jews, the tribes of Benjamin and Judah, are calling the other 10 tribes Gog and Magog. At some time before the 12th century, when the story of Gog and Magog enclosed by Alexander was conflated with the Jewish legend of the 10 tribes, Alexander was credited with having enclosed Gog and Magog behind the gate he is said to have built in the Caucasus. The Alexander legend says that he came upon wild people and unclean people who ate human flesh and had other vile customs, and to keep them from destroying the rest of the world, Alexander drove them between two mountains and then asked God to push the two mountains together and imprison them. And this story found its way not only into later versions of the Alexander legend, but also into the Quran and into the influential Greek revelations, which date from the end of the 7th century. And that was translated into Latin, which was sent out into the West, and it became a standard of Christian, the Christian Bible of its time. So it seems as though perhaps the Jews, the tribes of Benjamin and Judah, are trying to come up with this story about Alexander to convince the rest of the world that the lost 10 tribes of Israel are Gog and Magog, the apocalyptic destroyers of Ezekiel and Revelation. And the story of the lost 10 tribes is based on the biblical account of the 10 tribes of Israel led in captivity by the king of Assyria. And the 4th book of Ezra relates in the exile of lost 10 tribes and their future return to serve the Messiah on Mount Zion. They are beyond the Euphrates River, and the flow of which God stopped in order to let them cross. And when God wills it, he will stop the flow of the river once again and allow the 10 tribes to return. So switching back to purchase his pilgrims, when it talks about the country of the Tartarians, and it lies beyond the great mountain of Belgium, mentioned in the histories of Alexander, that is the history of that and its connection to the book of Revelation, in that these Tartarians are, at least by Alexander or the Jews, are being called Gog and Magog from Revelation 20, who are released to deceive the nations after the 1,000-year reign of Christ. And there are a lot of sevens in the book of Revelation. So interesting that these Tartarians are divided up into 7 different nations. And I'm wondering if those 7 nations are the 7 churches from the book of Revelation. And these 7 nations lived under subjection to their neighbors. So they didn't have a lot of war power, and their neighbors had subjection over them. But as it happened, a poor old man, being a smith, saw a vision in his sleep, namely a man armed in all white armor and mounted on a white horse, which, calling his name, said unto him, Changus, it is the will and pleasure of the immortal God that you be Lord and ruler over these nations of the Tartarians, and that you be delivered from the dominion of your neighbors, under which you have long remained. And you shall rule over your neighbors. And when Changus, hearing this word of God, he was replenished with exceeding joy, and made publicly known the vision which he had seen. But the rulers and commanders would not give credit to the vision, but they rather despised and mocked the old man. But the following night they themselves saw the same vision of the horse armed in white, who commanded them from the immortal God that they should be obedient to Changus and cause all to obey his command. Whereupon all the said chieftains and governors of the 7 nations of the Tartarians, calling the people together, made them yield obedience and reverence to Cengiz, and afterwards placing a chair for him in the midst and spreading a black felt carpet on the ground, and they set him thereon. And then the 7 chief rulers lifted him up, placed him on the throne with great triumph and acclamation, calling him Khan, their first emperor, and doing him solemn reverence with bowing their knees as to their lord and governor. The first son is heir to the crown, and installed with their ceremonies, the chief of the 7 tribes, clothed in white, caused the prince to sit upon a black woolen cloth spread upon the ground, willing him to behold the sun and to fear the immortal God. Then they set a crown upon his head, and the great lords kiss his feet, swear loyalty, and honor him with the most rich presents. Okay, so just a real quick summary here. He has a vision of a white horse, and he says, Cengiz, you're going to be lord and ruler over all the nations of the Tartarians. They put a crown upon his head, and they place him on a throne in the midst of them, and they call him Khan, their first emperor, and bowing their knees to him as their Lord and Governor. Revelation chapter 6, I watched as the Lamb opened the first of the 7 seals. And I heard one of the 4 living creatures say in a voice like thunder, Come, and I looked, and before me was a white horse. Its rider held a bow, and he was given a crown, and he rode out as a conqueror bent on conquest. I wonder if this Khan, who was given a crown, who's seen a vision of a white horse, is going to be riding on a horse and holding a bow. The Tartars are very ready and excellent archers on horseback, but on foot they are but slow. They are dexterous and ingenious in taking cities and castles, and are for the most part victorious over their enemies. Their manner of fight is very dangerous, so that in one conflict or skirmish, the Tartars, there are more slain and wounded than in any great battle over other nations, which happens by reason of their arrows, which they shoot strongly and surely out of their bows, being indeed so skillful in the art of shooting, that they commonly pierce all kind of armor, and it happens to be routed, yet they fly in troops and bands so well ordered that it's very dangerous to follow or pursue them, because they shoot their arrows backwards in the flight, wounding or killing oftentimes both men and horses that pursue them. So when this Tartarian man, Cengiz Khan, had a vision of a white horse, and then they made him a king and put a crown on his head, certainly they are Tartarians who are mounted on horses with bows and arrow. It seems a pretty close match to Revelation 6 and the opening of the first seal. I looked, and there before me was a white horse. Its rider held a bow, and he was given a crown, and he rode out as a conqueror bent on conquest. You shall rule over thy neighbors. So Cengiz Khan, being thus made emperor by common consent of all the Tartarians, determined that by anything he should make ordinances, and they should be observed by all. The first was that the Tartarians should believe and obey the immortal God, by whose will he was promoted to imperial dignity, which commandment they observed, and from thenceforth until this day they ever continued to call on the immortal God in all occasions. Secondly, the men should bear arms and should be numbered, and that every 10,000 should have a commander, and there's different ranks of the soldiers. And he rode against them which bordered next unto him, and he subdued them. So he conquered his neighbors, and he invaded diverse other nations, and conquered with great success, for he did all his exploits with a small troop of men, and was successful in his enterprises. Yet one day, accompanied by a small number, he encountered a great troop of his enemies, in such a sort that the fight begun between them, and he was valiantly defended himself, and his horse was slain under him. And the Tartarians, seeing that their lord was overthrown, betook themselves to flight, and they ran away. So the enemies, being all bruised in pursuing those that fled, and having no knowledge of the emperor, whom they had unhorsed and overthrown, he run and hid himself among certain shrubs for the safety of his life. So this is Genghis Khan. He's got his horse shot out from under him. The other Tartarians fled, and he went and hid in the shrubs for the safety of his life. And when the enemies returned for the purpose to spoil the dead carcasses and to seek out any who were hidden, it happened that an owl came and sat upon the little trees or shrubs which he had chosen for his cover. And when they looked, they decided not to look anymore at this place, because they assumed that because there was an owl sitting there, there must not be any man hidden beneath the bushes. So in the nighttime, he found a way to escape and took an off the path route back to his own people, and he told them what had befallen him. And for the Tartarians, they rendered thanks unto the immortal God, and the bird which under God was held by the means of the escape, they have ever since beheld it in such reverence amongst them, that happy is he who can get but a feather of an owl, for they wear it on their heads with great reverence, which I thought fit to set down in this book, that they cause might be known, for which the Tartarians use commonly to wear feathers on their heads. And the Emperor Genghis Khan is giving great thanks to God for his deliverance out of such a great danger of an army. So here is the second story for why the Tartarians revere the owl and have the owl on their flag. And it is because Genghis Khan escaped, and this owl supposedly sent by God to sit on the bushes that he was on, so that they did not, go into that bush and search for him and find him. Now, isn't it interesting that they wear a feather of the owl on their head? And it is common for the Tartarians to wear feathers on their heads. I think we can identify where the Native Americans got the feather wearing on their head. This is a Tartarian custom going back to 1200. Genghis Khan era. And once again, we know the Native Americans wear a feather or feathers on their head, which is a custom going back to the Tartarians and Emperor Genghis Khan. After the arrival of the Tartars, or the Indians, as they are now called. So here it's saying the Indians were once Tartarians. I believe that all Tartar tribes, like the former Americans, are the children of Israel. Now we must inquire from what Tartars the Americans are extracted. The Tartars, which about the year 1228, under the command of Genghis Khan, overspread the earth like a flood. They were successors of the 10 tribes of Israel, and they were carried into captivity by Assyria. The name Tartary, or rather Tartaria, seems to, by some testimony thereof, signify in the Syrian or Hebrew tongue remnants or remainders, because the Tartarians were remainders of the aforementioned lost 10 tribes of Israel, and the northern Tartary herdsmen preserve to this day the names Dan, Zebulun, and Naphtali. Dan, Zebulun, and Naphtali, of course, are the names of the lost 10 tribes of Israel, and they can be found on various maps of Tartary. This one here, up in the northern part, we can see the tribe of Dan, the tribe of Naphtali, and it even speaks about the 10 tribes of Israel and Naphtali. So not only is this saying that the Tartars are the lost 10 tribes of Israel, it's also saying that the Tartars are where the Americans came from. And it wouldn't have taken much, of course, for the lost 10 tribes of Israel here in Azareth to cross the Bering Strait and come into North America and Canada. And Genghis Khan had another vision, a second vision, where he seen the same horseman armed in white armor, and appeared to him, saying, Genghis Khan, it is the pleasure of the immortal God that you should pass over the mountain Belgian and direct your course westwards, where thou should possess kingdoms and countries and subdue many nations. And you may be assured that with the words that I speak unto you, they are from the immortal God. Arise and go with your people to the Mount Belgian, to the part where it joins the sea. And they went forth until they came to the place where the great and deep sea did beat against the mountain, and it appeared that there was no passage for them. So the Tartarians are now heading to the west, and they came to a place, they come to some water, and they can't get past it. And presently Genghis Khan, as he had been commanded by God, he prayed all night, and in the morning he saw that the sea was departed from the mountain, and had left them a way of 9 feet in breadth to pass. And they were all astonished exceedingly, and rendering thanks to the immortal God most devoutly, and passed on their way, basically going towards the west. And it sounds once again like the story of Moses and the parting of the Red Sea, where God has parted the water for them and allowed them to cross back to the west. Now, wasn't it in Fort Esdras when the 10 tribes of Israel were left out? They entered through a narrow passage in the Euphrates River because God worked a marvel for them, and he held back the source of the river so that they could pass over, and that they would dwell in Arzareth until the last time, until the end times, when they would come back again, and the Most High will hold back the source of the river so that they might be able to pass back to the west. They are beyond the Euphrates River, the flow of which God stopped in order to let them cross. And when God wills it, he will stop the flow of the river once again when it comes time for the 10 tribes to return. Is this not the 10 tribes of Israel? And are they not going once again to the west? And here we have an account that God has made a way for them 9 feet in breadth so they can pass through the water. And therefore are we not in the end times? Because the Tartarians dwelled in Arzareth until the last times, and now they've left. So that means that we are beyond the last times. So God parted the river or the lake, and they stepped toward the west. But as histories of the Tartarians do mention, after they passed over the mountains, they endured some hunger and thirst for certain days, because the land was a desert and the waters were bitter with salt, and they could not by any means drink it until at length they came to where they had all necessities abundantly. In a place they abode many days. Revelation 7:16, never again will they hunger, never again will they thirst. The sun will not beat down on them, nor any scorching heat. For the Lamb at the center of the throne will be their shepherd, and he will lead them to springs of living water, and God will wipe away every tear from their eyes. Is the Lamb at the center of the throne and their shepherd, Genghis Khan, someone who led them to springs of living water? Genghis Khan led them through the desert where there was nothing to drink and nothing to eat, to a place where they came where all necessities were abundant. And it happened that by the will of God that Genghis Khan grew dangerously sick, and the physicians despaired of his recovery. And by this reason he called before him his 12 sons. Sounds like the 12 disciples. His 12 sons, he persuaded them to unite and concord. And he told each one of his sons to bring an arrow, and he bound them all together. And he asked the oldest one to break them, and he couldn't. So then he tried the next one, second one, he couldn't break it. The third one, none of them could break it. So then he commanded the youngest son to take some of the arrows individually out and break them, which was easily accomplished. And Genghis Khan said to his sons, in like manner, as long as you remain in concord and united, your empire shall continue. But as soon as there is division amongst you, your power is easily overthrown.
And many other good examples were given by him and gathered by the Tartarians, which in their language they call Jasach, or the instructions of Genghis Khan. And afterwards he caused the wisest and the best of his son, called Hochata Khan, to be received as his successor of the empire before he died. Then he rested in peace, and his son, called Hochata Khan, was placed in his seat. Now there's a lot about Hochata Khan. That's coming in episode 2. One thing he did was he proceeded to the Iron Gate, which Alexander built at the foot of the Caucasus, and he raised it, lest it might hinder his return. So apparently the son of Genghis Khan found the gate which Alexander had built, and he destroyed it. And we'll learn about how these sons of Genghis Khan went on to spread the kingdom of Christianity and even take back the holy city, the kingdom of Jerusalem. Now, I'm sure this is just a phonetic coincidence, but Genghis Khan is the guy who sees the vision of the white horse, and he is chosen by God to be the leader of the 10 tribes of Israel, the Tartarians. Now, the word Khan is just another name for king. Genghis Khan is, Khan isn't his last name, it's a title. It's Genghis King is one way to say it. So if I just take his name, Genghis Khan, another way to write that is just, the way we would say it is King Genghis. Again, it's probably just a phonetic coincidence here, but King Genghis sounds awful close to King Jesus. King Genghis, King Jesus. That's very phonetically close. Like I said, this is probably just a coincidence, but Genghis Khan, or Khan Genghis, King Genghis, sounds very much like King Jesus. And they're speaking about Genghis Khan here, and the Caesar of Cathay, or the King of Cathay, that is the greatest prince, and not without reason, for in magnificent of courts, ample of dominion, abundance of treasure, number of soldiers, he goes far beyond all the kings of Asia. And he reigns in such majesty that his subjects call him the shadow of spirits and the son of the immortal God. Now, these Tartarians are baptized in the faith of the Christian, which they hold to this day. And there's a perpetual peace between Tartarians and Christians. These Tartarians are Christians. The Tartarian king made 7 petitions that he and all his people would be baptized in the Christian faith, that there would be perpetual peace and friendship established between the Christians and the Tartarians. Finally, that he would deliver free the Holy Land of our Lord and restore it to the Christians. So these Tartarians are certainly Christians, and they are calling Genghis Khan the son of the immortal God, the Son of God. Who is the Son of God? That is Jesus Christ. So according to these Christian people, their leader was Jesus Christ, the Son of the immortal God, the shadow of spirits, which may be the Holy Spirit. They called him the Holy Spirit, the Son of God. Now, I know it sounds quite crazy that thinking that Genghis Khan might be the second coming of Jesus Christ and liberating the lost 10 tribes of Israel back from Arzareth and restoring them to the Holy Land of Jerusalem. Was Genghis Khan, Khan Genghis, King Genghis, or perhaps King Jesus? Was his coming prophesied as the opening of the first seal, where he saw a white horse and a rider holding a bow who was given a crown, and he rode out and conquered and was bent on conquest? So this is just the beginning of the history of the Christian Tartarian Empire, and the first son of Genghis Khan is Hochata Khan, and we'll be covering him and further Christianity amongst the Tartarians, and more connections, of course, to the book of Revelation, which seems that the events of Revelation may have already come to pass, or at least a portion of them have already happened, and that when John is addressing the 7 churches in the province of Asia, he is definitely addressing the 7 churches, or perhaps the 7 empires in the province of Tartaria, and that the book of Revelation is a letter to them about their end times. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys in episode 2. Tartarian Christianity, the Revelation. This is episode 2. If you missed the first episode, go back and view it. And now we dug into Chinggis Khan, or Genghis Khan, and his Christian roots, which seem to have a 1-to-1 correlation with the Apocalypse of Ezra, or For Esdras, as this book is called, which describes when the Tartarians went to Arzareth, and that they would dwell in Arzareth until the last time. And now we're digging into Chinggis Khan and his empire, as it seems to align with the book of For Esdras, that this may have been the quote-unquote last times as described in Revelation and the book of For Esdras. So Chinggis Khan, as we left off last time, has passed away and passed his empire on to his first son, Hokata Khan, who succeeded in the empire, was a man of very much valor and wisdom, which made him very beloved of the Tartarians, who were always faithful and obedient to him. So he thought about what is the best manner that he might subdue all of Asia, and proceeded to the Iron Gate, which Alexander had built at the foot of the Caucasus, and he raised it lest it might hinder his return. So he has evidently found the gate that Alexander had built, which seems to be a part of the Great Wall, and he smashes that gate down so he doesn't have any hindrance when he's trying to return to Tartaria. And he, desiring to subdue all of Asia, called his 3 sons and gave them each a great army. Jochi, the eldest, was sent westward to the Tigris, Beidou to the north, and Chagode was sent to the south. So divided Asia, or Tartaria, among his 3 sons. So Hokata Khan called Beidou and gives him 30,000 Tartarian soldiers called Tamachi, or conquerors. And the Tartarians were coming, was very much afraid. He got all the mercenaries he could, and he got barbarians and Latins and anyone he could to help him out. And he even sent to his neighbors, promising them many favors and benefits if they would assist him. And so he assembled a great number of men, and he went towards the place where the Tartarians made their abode. And he found nothing, astonished at his approach. And it sounds like an ambush, for they manually gave him battle at a place called Kusdrak, and they overthrew the army of the Turks, and the Tartarians won the kingdom of Turkey in the year 1244. Now, Turkey is a very important area, and it's interesting that Hokata Khan, the son of Genghis Khan, told them to go conquer Turkey, but once they get to Turkey, they basically could stop and stay there. Now, in the book of Revelation, John wrote this letter, the book of Revelation, to the 7 churches in the province of Asia, which seems, like I've said, to the 7 churches in the province of Tartaria. And he wrote it to 7 specific churches: the church of Ephesus, Smyrna, Pergamum, Thyatira, Sardis, Philadelphia, and Laodicea. So those, he is writing it to 7 churches specifically. And the common interpretation of Revelation is that John was not writing to these actual 7 churches, that he was, that these are real churches that existed in those times, but he was using them as a metaphor, essentially, and that the churches, the common interpretation I've heard is that these churches represent different churches throughout the historical time. But they are 7 churches, and if we go and look those up, to find a map of where they're at, Of course, they're all in Turkey. Here we have Turkey, and the 7 churches that John was writing to are these 7 churches right here. They're all on the western side of the country of Turkey. Each one of these actually has a church there and a ruins. I didn't see any star forts nearby, but this is the church of Pergamum. Here's a photo of the church. So there is some kind of ruins still around there, and definitely the footprint on the land. But zooming out from Pergamum, let's go to the next church. Here we got Thyatira, which is in the middle of a city, but there is still some ruins preserved down here right in the middle of the city. This is about what seems to be left of that church, but something's there still. Next one down here we have Smyrna. Smyrna, once again, smack in the middle of a city. Not much seems to be here, but ruins surrounded by the city. So here's what's left of that church. And heading east from Smyrna, we get Sardis. Looks like some orchards and vegetation surrounding the Sardis ruins. All right, we get a little bit better structure here. More than a few columns laying around. And moving to the southwest to Ephesus. Here we go. Quite the ruins left over here at Ephesus. And taking a closer look, we see what may be considered and described as Tartarian architecture. A lot of detail definitely preserved on these old stones. And the Church of Ephesus may also be the Basilica of St. John, which is just right over here. And we see the huge ruins over here at the Basilica of St. John. So there's a photo of that area. Now leaving Ephesus and going to the northeast here to Philadelphia. This one's not as easy to see, especially on the Google map image, but the Philadelphia church is supposed to be right around here. I just can't make it out. I guess there's some pieces of it left over, maybe blending in with the trees. So there's a photo of that area, and supposedly these structures would be what was left over from that church. And lastly, south of Philadelphia, we have Laodicea. The ruins of Laodicea, those are quite apparent here on the map. A lot of interesting things to look at. Maybe just amphitheaters where they could have their sermons and preaching and whatnot. But here's a photo from that area, Laodicea. And the reason I wanted to look at each one of the church and the location of it on a map is, well, the book of Revelation is written to these 7 churches. John was either talking to these guys or using these 7 churches as a metaphor. But keep these 7 churches and their location in mind as we're reading about Genghis Khan, and realize that the Tartarians have came into Turkey and now have conquered Turkey. They're occupying this land, and at this point, 1244, we could call this whole area of Turkey as Tartarian land because they've conquered it and run out the king of Turkey. And definitely an important area if you want to retake the Holy Land, because Jerusalem and Israel are right here. So having a dominion over Turkey is definitely going to be a key component to coming down and taking back the city of Jerusalem. So the Tartarians won the kingdom of Turkey in the year 1244. And now this area is theirs. And here we find again that if John was writing his letter to the churches in Turkey, that fast forward to the year 1244, he may just be writing his letter once again to the Tartarians who now hold the area of Turkey. And after a little time, Hokada Khan died, and his son succeeded the empire. He was called Jino Khan, but his life was short, and after him succeeded a kinsman of his, Mango Khan, who was very great power and subdued many provinces. And at length, with a great spirit, he went into the Acathian Sea to take a certain land. And while he was besieging, the inhabitants of those parts, being very subtle and ingenious, sent certain divers secretly underwater, who continued so long after underneath of the ship that Gino Khan was on, that they made many holes in it, and the water came into the ship, and none of them observed it, and they couldn't stop the leaks, and then the ship sunk, and Mango Khan was drowned therein. So I don't know how they did that in the year 1244. They had divers who went underwater and stayed under the boat for a very long time, drilling holes in it. I mean, that almost sounds like somebody who has oxygen tanks, and the people of 1244, I can't imagine holding their breath and going down there with some kind of a hand drill and drilling holes in it without any of the people on the boat seeing what was going on. This almost sounds like they've got some kind of scuba gear and maybe power-driven drill to get the holes. Hard to say. But after Mango Khan was drowned, the Tartarians returned home and chose his brother Kobila Khan for their emperor, and he reigned over them for 42 years. He became a Christian, and he founded a certain city called Johns in the kingdom of Cathay, which is reported to be greater than Rome. Now, Rome is touted to be the greatest city in the world, and they even, Rome wasn't built in a day and all this. They're going to say, of course, that Rome is the greatest city in the world, but not according to this account. And to this account, the kingdom of Cathay held a city called Johns, which was greater than Rome. And in the city, Mango Khan dwelled there until his dying day. And I tried to find this, and I tried to find the city of Johns on a map. No luck with that. Even looking at this map of Cathay, I didn't see any cities around here called Johns. So no luck locating it on a map yet. If you happen to find a map with Johns, let me know. I did find a different text that talks about it, though. This one's from Marquis Pauli Veneti. And it talks here, although in Latin, about in Tartary, where there is the city of Johns in the kingdom of Cathay, and it's a city that's greater than Rome. A small translation of this block of text is here. However, the Tartars who had come with him, as they were returning, the brother of the Lord had gathered Kobitis Khan, and he reigned for 42 years. So this is Kobila Khan, who reigned for 42 years. The Christians, and they laid foundation to the city, which is called Johns, in the kingdom of Cathay, who is greater than Rome, it is said to be. And the kingdom of the Tartarians go on to conquer a lot of kingdoms here. Turkestan, they go to Cumania, Hungary. They went to the kingdom of Russia and conquered it. The land of Gazaria. The kingdom of Bulgaria and the kingdom of Hungary. And afterwards the Tartarians went to parts of Germany, and they were not successful there. The Tartarians were denied passage at a certain bridge, and Baido Khan, increased with fury, commanded that all should pass through the water instead of taking the bridge, and he himself was the first that entered, exposing himself and his followers to apparent danger or death. For such was the breadth of the river and the violence of the stream that the horses were wearied away before they could get to the other side of the river. And when they realized they couldn't cross the river that way, they returned to Russia and Cumania, which they had formerly conquered. And they never since have the Tartarians attempted to go back into Germany. And Kangade Khan, with his Tartarians, his father gave him road to the south into India. And they found many deserts, mountains, and dry lands not inhabited. So it sounds like they're going down in India and possibly Egypt. and they find they could not pass that way. And having lost many people and horses and other beasts, they turned to the west, where he went to his brother Joshi and let him know what had happened. He basically just found a desert and it was too hot. And so his brother gave him part of that country, and being content with their portions, they lived peaceably and quietly together. And the successor of Joshi now lived and is called Barak. Wait, that sounded like an old president. Let's call him Barach instead. In the year of the Lord, 1253, Hathan, the king of Armenia, seeing the Tartarians had subdued all kingdoms, countries, and lands, and even the kingdom of Turkey, taking counsel of the wise, he resolved to go in person to the emperor of the Tartarians. And he went out beyond the Iron Gate, and he came to Alamek, where Mango Khan, the emperor, resided, who rejoiced much at the coming of the king of Armenia, because other than the coming of Genghis Khan over the mountain Belgian, no other great prince had come to meet him. And therefore he received the king of Armenia and entertained him with much honor and love, and gave unto him some of the greatest persons about him to attend, and did him many favors. And the king of Armenia, with good deliberation, made 7 petitions. First, he desired that the emperor of Tartaria and all his people should be baptized in the Christian faith, leaving other sects. Secondly, that there might be a perpetual peace and friendship established between the Christians and the Tartarians. Thirdly, that all countries which the Tartarians either had conquered or should conquer, the churches and the churchmen, whether secular or religious, might be freed and exempt from all their servitude and payments. Fourth, that he would deliver them the Holy Land and the holy sepulchre of the Lord out of the hands of the Muslims, and restore them to the Christians. Firstly, that he would endeavor with the destruction of the king of Baldach, who was the head and chief doctor of the sect of Mohammedanism, or the sect of Islam. Mahometism is, in English, Mohammedanism, a reference to the Muslim religion. And Mango Khan, having considered the petitions of the king of Armenia, returned his answer that we will accept all your requests made, and will cause them, God willing, to be duly accomplished. First, I myself, being emperor and lord of the Tartarians, will be baptized in the faith of the Christians, and wish and advise all my subjects to do the same. Yet we're not going to force any to do it. They have free will if they want to be baptized and join Christianity. And second, we will agree that there will be a perpetual peace between the Tartarians and the Christians, and all churches of Christians and clergymen, whether secular or religious, shall enjoy the privilege of immunity and liberty and exemption throughout the dominion of our empire, that we shall not molest them in any kind of ways. So it sounds like there is somewhat of religious freedom, or at least the churches don't have to pay dues to the king or anything like that. And touching the matter of the Holy Land, we say that if we can, we will willingly go there in person for the reverence we bear to our Lord Jesus Christ. But because of a lot of things happening at the moment, we need to stay where we're at. And so we will have our brother Halun take on this accomplishment for the freeing of the city of Jerusalem and all of the Holy Land out of the hands of the pagans, and restoring it to the Christians. And after that, Mango Khan went forward and was baptized according to the hands of a certain bishop who was chancellor of the king of Armenia, and all of his household, with many other great persons of both sexes. And then he made the choice that he would accompany his brother Halun to restore the Holy Land to the hands of the Christians. So they passed over the great river of Faison and invaded countries and lands everywhere. In less than 6 months, they easily subdued the whole kingdom of Persia, because it was without a ruler. And there was a certain impregnable castle called Tegado, which was so well furnished with all kinds of necessary provision, and so strongly built that they feared they wouldn't be able to assault it. And Halun commanded his captains to take with him 10,000 of the Tartarians and siege the castle until he had taken it. And they remained at the siege thereof for a space of 7 years, both winter and summer. So they were able to take the castle Tigado, and through the mercy of Jesus Christ, the king of Armenia came joyfully home to his own country after that. Now that castle Tigado appears to be right here. So they had already taken Turkey, and the castle that they couldn't take for 7 years seems that it's right over here. And it is quite interesting to look at this mountain peak. It at first you wouldn't think there was any castle here at all, but you can see little remnants of some pieces of it. And it seems it's this place called Gurdka, which was a castle and a fortified mountain defended by a triple ring of fortifications at its foot, making the citadel impregnable to direct military assault. It says here that Gurdka resisted Mongol invasion in 1253 AD for 17 years, becoming the last Nizari stronghold in Persia to fall. So this lines up with the account that we're reading. There's a close-up image of it. You can see a little bit left on top and some kind of structure over here, but not too much really left of it. And looking at Google Earth, it almost looks like it got melted by, I don't know, maybe the castle got knocked over and the bricks all fall down, but it almost looks like this thing got melted, and it looks like leftovers of a volcano, some volcano lava running down or something like that. And comparing this sort of almost melted rock look and comparing it to, the other mountain peaks around, you don't really see this kind of melted mass look on these other nearby mountain peaks. So I don't know if that, maybe that's just the way the rock was, but maybe, fire from heaven or something like that came down and destroyed this whole castle and melted it. Either way, not much left over of it, but certainly sounds like quite the castle, and took 7 or 17 years to overcome. So now that Helun had order in the kingdom of Persia and conquered all of Persia, and he went to a certain province near Armenia called Sorlok, and at the beginning of the winter he besieged Baldach, in which the king resided, and he was the chief master and doctor of the irreligious sect of Islam, Mohammedanism, and reinforcing his army with 30,000 Tartarians who went into the kingdom of Turkey. He assaulted the city by the shore, and he took it without any great difficulty or delay. And the city of Baldach seems to be ancient Babylon, or at least a city very near Babylon. This, of course, here we can see it's identified as Babylon, as it is here in this book, the Ludolf von Schumann's Description of the Holy Land and the Way Thither, written in 1350, ancient Babylon or Baldach. In eastern Chaldea, there is an exceedingly fair and noble city, powerful beyond measure, and at this day it is the best of all cities in the east, named Baldach. It stands on the banks of the Euphrates, one of the rivers of paradise, and they who dwell there say they believe that half a mile or thereabouts from it stood ancient Babylon. This is also proved by the vast ruins and immense piles of buildings of diverse sorts and of stones, which have a strange aspect from a distance, especially at the place where the Tower of Babel stood, where the confusion of tongues arose. Another proof that it's ancient Babylon lies in an impassable road between the ruins and the city of Baldach. You can't pass it because of venomous creatures, and there's many other signs that show how ancient Babylon stood there, and the inhabitants do most firmly believe, because of those venomous creatures, that ancient Babylon was removed and called by another name to wit, Baldach. In this city of Baldach there are now the richest and best merchants under heaven. Neither is there any place in the east so much and so many different kinds of merchandise as there. In this city used to dwell the king, that is the successor of Mohammed, to whom the Muslims render obedience in all things, even as do the Christians to the Pope, the successor of St. Peter. I will tell you something about the loss of the city of Baldach, according to what I have read thereof in the Chronicles and the histories of the kings of Armenia, and have heard from right truthful knight, who was there at the time, in the year of the Lord, 1268, when the Tartars had conquered all the kingdoms of the east. Iko, the king of Armenia, and his own accord proceeded to the great Khan, the emperor of the Tartars, to visit him. His 4 chief captains, each who had 30,000 Tartars underneath of him, besieged Baldach without ceasing, and they took the city on the 13th day, slew all the inhabitants, both young men and old alike, and won such rich spoils of gold, silver, precious stones, and other kinds of wealth, as no one ever was heard of taken in any city whatsoever. And there was found in Baldach so much treasure and riches as it would scarcely be believed to be in all the world. And this city of Baldach was taken in the year 1258. So when Halun had conquered the city of Baldach, he caused the king to be brought to him, and all of his treasure laid before him. And then he asked him whether he had been lord of all that treasure. And when the king affirmed it, he asked him why he hadn't made use of his treasure in getting aid from his neighbors and hiring mercenary soldiers to defend him and his country from the power of the Tartarians. And his answer was that he thought his own people would have been sufficient to defend against the Tartarians. And then Halun said to the king, "You are the chief doctor and teacher of all that believe the deceiving doctrine of Mohammed, and you have received rewards and gifts from all of them. Therefore, such and so precious a master must be fed with no other meat, but with these precious things, which thou hast loved and kept so carefully, all which we give you for your sustenance." And so he commanded that the king should be shut into his chamber, and that his pearl and gold should be set before him, that he might eat as much as he would, but he would have no other meat or drink to be given to him. And by this means the miserable wretched ended his life in a miserable manner, and there has been no other king in Baldach after him. That is brutal. How comes it, wretched man, that you have such great treasure that I fear even to look upon, and with your might you have overcome the whole world, and ought to have brought it under your yoke? Why then did you not hire enough troops to defend your city? And the king answered, "Evil counsel brought this ruin upon me, for they said that even women could easily defend the city against the Tartars." Then Halun said, "Behold, you are Mohammed's successor and the teacher of his law, and I dare not hurt you, neither is it fitting that you should live or eat like other men, for out of your mouth proceeds the law and the doctrine of Mohammed." And he ordered him to be placed in a fair place, and poured before him gold and silver and precious stones and pearls, and saying to him, "The mouth from where proceeds so great law and doctrine, it befits you to eat such precious food as this." So the king was shut up in the palace, and on the 12th day was found dead of hunger. And after him there's been no king, no successor of Mohammed, who has arisen in Baldach even to this day. Near Baldach, a distance of 4 days' journey, is another city, which once was called Susa, wherein Abahasuerus flourished. This city, which was once called Susa, is now called Tharius. And in this city there is a dry tree, whereof it is said that the emperor of the Romans is fated to hang his shield thereon. The people of the city say that no Jew can live or sojourn therein. Oh, is that some anti-Semitism right there? Of course, the Jews not being Tartarians, but rather the Israelites, the tribes of Benjamin and Judah, who became one tribe, which was called the Jews. He gave the providence to his captains and his rulers, and gave them a charge that Christians everywhere should be treated lovingly and preferred to the government of the castles and cities, and that the Muslims to be held under straight subjection. And Halun had a wife called Duo Koskaro, who descended from the kings who came from the east, who were guided by the star of the nativity of our Lord. So the three wise men who brought the frankincense and myrrh to King Jesus when he was born, his wife descended from him. Now, Halun is the king of the Tartarians, and so his wife is definitely a Tartarian. And here we can figure out that this Tartarian woman called Duo Koskaro descended from the kings who seen baby Jesus at the nativity. So once again, confirmation that the three wise men who seen baby Jesus were Tartarians. And her family, Duo Koskaro, was a most devout Christian with great means of destroying the temples of the Muslims and prohibiting the ceremonies of Muhammad, and raising their temples to the ground, and brought the Muslims into subjection that they dare not show their heads. So after that, Halun rested for a year, sent for the king of Armenia to meet him in the city of Robes, because they intended to go towards the Holy Land that they might restore it to the Christians. So they had a conference in how they were going to take back the Holy Land, and he advised them that because the king of Halapi ruled over the kingdom of Syria, in which the city of Jerusalem was seated, the way to get to the Holy Land was to first besiege the city of Halapi, as that was the chief city in Syria, of which he had won it, and it was not difficult for him to subdue all the rest of the country. And when they besieged the city of Halapi, or Aleppo, they found that it was great strength and well-walled and inhabited, and therefore they used mines to get underground. And with slings and other engines, they besieged it so straitly and assaulted it so manfully on every side that it seemed impregnable. Yet in the space of 9 days they obtained it. In the city they found such an incredible store of wealth as would hardly be believed. Yet there was a castle in the midst of the city which held out for 11 days after the city was taken, at which length it was won by undermining. So the city of Halapi, and afterwards the kingdom of Syria, was taken by Halu in the year of the Lord, 1240. Now the 1240 date is supposedly wrong. It says here 1260. So supposedly the Syria was taken in 1260. But both Latin and Italian say 1240. I'm not sure what's... seems like 1260 would be the correct date. As just prior to this, the city of Baldach was taken in the year 1258. So 2 years later, they've taken Syria. So these Tartarians are closing in on Jerusalem and the Holy Land. They've taken Turkey. They've come over here into Iran, where Castle Tigado is at. They've taken this whole area. Now they've come over to Syria. They've taken Syria. So they're now on the doorstep of Jerusalem. And after that, Halun settled the affairs of those cities and countries which he had won. And next he intended to go into Jerusalem and free the Holy Land from the pagans and restore it to the Christians. But there came to him a messenger on the third day who brought news that the Tartarian Empire was vacant by the death of his brother Mango Khan, and that his return to Tartaria was earnestly expected to be the successor of Tartaria. And this report made him very sorrowful. So he could no longer proceed in person into Jerusalem, but he left 10,000 Tartars to keep the kingdom of Syria under the command of a captain called Gioboga. And he gave them order that he should conquer the Holy Land, restore it to the Christians. So thus, leaving his son at Taurus, he hastened eastwards and to go a great journey to go back to Tartaria. Now, so far, the Tartarians and the sons of Genghis Khan have been working hard to further the kingdom of Christianity and to take back the Holy Land for the Christians. Just almost as prophesied in the book of Revelation, when the Lamb opens the second seal, another horse came out, a fiery red one, and it was given the power to take peace from the earth and to make people kill each other, and to him was given a large sword. So, there's also a third seal that is opened, and that's a black horse, and holding in his hand is a pair of scales. So it sounds like from the seals being opened that there's some good, and then there's some bad, and we'll find the same account with these Tartarians. Not all of them are going to continue to serve God and to be Christians. But certainly these sons of Genghis Khan have carried out what appears to be the opening of the first seal. He saw the white horse, the rider held a bow, and he was given a crown, and he rode out as a conqueror bent on conquest. And these Tartarians are seeing the white horse. They are riders on a horse with a bow. They were given a crown, and they are conquerors bent on conquest. In fact, they've taken essentially all of Asia and even down into India and Africa. And they've taken Turkey and Iran and Syria. And the next step here is to move into Israel and take back the holy city. So wrapping up episode 2 right here, we'll get episode 3 kicked off with the 3rd chapter and seeing what happens with the rest of these Tartarians, and then try to figure out where they finally went and why do the Tartarians seem to have completely disappeared off the face of the earth. Maybe if we keep digging, we'll figure out why there are abandoned cities all over the earth circa 1800. Beginnings of the 1800s, we find just these abandoned cities with almost ruins around them. These massive cities, seemingly completely abandoned. This one being Istanbul. Here it is again, buildings the size which is hardly comprehensible, and yet there's one person in sight. Nobody's around. Standing on what seems to be a very old and abandoned road that doesn't seem to be used anymore. Where are the people who inhabit this building? Why have these cities gone to complete ruin and abandoned? Here we just got cows left over standing around a city. One carriage and one man. Other than that, just junk and ruins and what seems to be abandoned cities. So we'll keep digging into the history of the Tartarians, comparing these historical accounts with what we read about in the book of Revelation, and continue our search for truth. Thanks once again for watching, and stay tuned for episode 3. Tartarian Christianity, episode number 3. In the previous episode, the Tartarians went into, Baldach, and they killed the king there. It was pretty brutal, shoving gold and pearls down his throat and making him eat it until he starved to death. Halun had disposed of the city of Baldach, and we know that Baldach is Babylon. That is clarified in the previous episode. So this is the city of Babylon, and they had found such great riches there. Riches like they had never seen before. So much treasure and riches as would scarcely be believed to be in all the world. And the city of Baldach was taken in the year 1258. And in the previous episode, I think I missed an important connection to the book of Revelation. In Revelation, there are 3 chapters in a row about Babylon. Babylon, the prostitute on the beast, lament over the fallen Babylon. Fallen Babylon. Didn't Babylon just fall to the Tartarians? Warning to escape Babylon's judgment. Babylon seems like it received judgment from the Tartarians. Threefold woe over Babylon's fall. The finality of Babylon's doom. And threefold hallelujah over Babylon's fall. So we've got 3 chapters talking about Babylon. So I'm not going to read all 3 chapters, but let's look at a few key parts here. Now, the city of Babylon is called the prostitute on the beast, so it refers to the city as a woman. I saw a woman sitting on a scarlet beast that was covered with blasphemous names and had 7 heads and 10 horns. And I'm pretty sure the 10 horns are the lost 10 tribes of Israel, or the Tartarians. We'll see why in just a second. But the woman was dressed in purple and scarlet and glittering with gold, precious stones, and pearls. So just riches, because purple and scarlet are, of course, expensive colors to get back then, and gold, precious stones, and pearls. So gold and pearls. And what happened when the Tartarians destroyed the city of Baldach, or Babylon? The Tartarian king Halun ordered the king of Babylon to be placed in a fair palace and poured out on him gold, silver, precious stones, and pearls. So here we have in the year 1258 that Babylon is that it has such a great treasure that the Tartarians feared to even look upon it. And what do we have in Babylon but right here? Gold and silver, precious stones, and pearls. And what do we have right here in Revelation? The woman, or the city of Babylon, or Baldach, was dressed in purple and scarlet and was glittering with gold, precious stones, and pearls. It's an exact match. She held a golden cup in her hand filled with abominable things and the filth of her adulteries. The 10 horns you saw are the 10 kings who have not yet received a kingdom, but who for 1 hour will receive authority as kings, along with the beast. And this part's a little confusing for me because it says that they will wage war against the Lamb. And we'll see the Tartarians do that shortly, but right now, at this point in time, when they're destroying Babylon, they are doing Christian work. They are Christian Tartarians at this point. But it is the beast and the 10 horns hate the prostitute. They hate Babylon, and they will bring her to ruin and leave her naked. They will eat her flesh and burn her with fire. So it seems as though God is using what I have interpreted here is the 10 tribes, the lost 10 tribes of Israel, the 10 horns, the 10 Tartarians, and God uses them to bring ruin to Babylon. And the part that says they will eat her flesh is interesting. We'll see that these Tartarians do in fact use some cannibalism, and pretty confusing here about the 10 horns, but it says that they will wage war against the Lamb, but the Lamb will triumph over them because he is the Lord of lords and King of kings. For God has put it into their hearts to accomplish his purpose by agreeing to hand over the beast their royal authority until God's words are fulfilled. And that's what sounds like happening right now with the Tartarians. God has put it into their heart to accomplish his purpose, and they have gone out and completely brought ruin to the city of Babylon. Tartarian king Halun disposed the city of Baldach. He killed the king, and after that, there has been no other king in Baldach or Babylon after him. Fallen is Babylon the Great. She has become a dwelling for demons and a haunt for every impure spirit. A dwelling for demons and a haunt for impure spirits. This location has been identified as Babylon for a lot of reasons, but one of them is that a proof lies in an impassable road between the ruins of Babylon and the city of Baldach for a reason by venomous creatures. So they can't even get over to the ruins of Babylon because they can't get past the road because of the reason of venomous creatures. For because of those venomous creatures, ancient Babylon was removed, and they call it by another name, Baldach. So they're saying that after the Tower of Babylon fell, venomous creatures are inhabiting the area or preventing anybody from going near it. She has become a dwelling for demons and a haunt for every impure spirit, unclean bird, unclean and detestable animal. And the kings of earth committed adultery with her, and the merchants of earth grew rich from her excessive luxuries. And remember, Babylon is supposedly a great city. The city of Baldach is a great merchant city, of course, because they're, they have more wealth than anybody in the world. But we know they're a huge merchant city. A great river runs through the midst of it, by means of which the merchants transport their goods to and from the Sea of India. So we know that it's full of merchants. The merchants of the earth grew rich from her excessive luxuries. And that reminded me of one of the seals. Definitely identified the first seal with the white horse as being Genghis Khan, the Tartarian king. And the second seal is the red horse, with the rider given power to take peace from the earth and to make people kill each other. But the third seal is a black horse, and on it is a pair of scales in his hand. Now the pair of scales is a tool of the merchant. So this pair of scales and the rider who's holding it on the black horse, this third seal may be a reference to Babylon and all of the merchants there of the earth who grew rich from her excessive luxuries. But let's go back to Marco Polo's account and see what he has to say. The city of Baldach, anciently called Babylon, and there is the king or the master of the Muslims, just as the Pope is to the Christians. So, here Baldach is essentially the king of Islam. A great river flows through the midst of it, by means of which the merchants transport their goods to and from the Sea of India. One of these seven angels came to me and said, "Come, I will show you the punishment of the great prostitute who sits by many waters." So Babylon, this Baldach definitely is sitting by many waters. It's got a river flowing through it and sitting right on the India Sea. In Baldach, there's a manufacture of silks wrought with gold, and also damask, as well as velvets. Almost all pearls brought to Europe from India have undergone the process of boring at this place. The Mohammed's law is studied here regularly, as is magic. With such violence, the great city of Babylon will be thrown down, never to be found again. Your merchants were the world's important people. By your magic spell, all the nations were led astray. So Revelation says that Babylon has the merchants of the world, and they are practicing magic spells. Just like Marco Polo says, they practice magic, physics, astronomy, geomancy, and physiognomy. It is the noblest and most extensive city to be found in this part of the world. And how did the king of Baldach die? A manner which sounds awfully similar to this: give back to her as she has given. Pay her back double for what she has done. Pour her a double portion from her own cup. Pour her a double portion from her own cup. The Tartarian king ordered the king of Baldach to be placed in a fair palace. He poured out his gold and his silver, his precious stones and pearls, and he said to him, "From the mouth where proceeds so great law and doctrine, it befits ye to eat such precious food as this." So the king of Baldach was shut up in a palace, and on the 12th day he was found dead from hunger. You have received rewards and gifts from all, and therefore such a precious master must be fed with no other meat but with these precious things, which thou hast loved and kept so carefully. So all that we're going to give you for your sustenance is this gold and pearls. And so he commanded that the king of Baldach be shut into a chamber, and that his pearl and gold should be set before him, that he might eat as much of it as he can, and no other meat or drink should be given to him. And by this means the miserable wretch ended his life in a miserable manner. Give back to her as she has given. Pay back to her double for what she has done. Pour her a double portion from her own cup. That's what the king of Babylon got, which brought him to his death. Give her as much torment and grief as the glory and luxury she gave herself. Give her as much torment and grief as the luxury she gave herself. Turn her luxury and glory into a torment. That's exactly what the Tartarians did. In her heart she boasts, I sit enthroned as a queen. I am not a widow, I will never mourn. Therefore in one day her plagues will overtake her, death, mourning, and famine. She will be consumed by fire, for mighty is the Lord God who judges her. Woe to you, great city, you mighty city of Babylon. In 1 hour your doom has come. The Tartarian king Halun besieged Baldach and reinforced his army with 30,000 Tartarians that were in the kingdom of Turkey, and they assaulted the city by the shore, and they took it without any great difficulty or delay. Sounds like they took it in 1 day or the 1 hour. No, they took it without any great difficulty or delay. And in her heart she boasted, I sit enthroned as a queen. I am not a widow, I will never mourn. The Tartarian king asks the king of Baldach, how come, wretched man, that you have so much treasure that I even fear to look upon it? Why did you not hire enough troops to defend your city? And the king answered, evil counsel brought this ruin upon me, for they said that even a woman could easily defend the city against the Tartars. So he's just proud, and he thinks that he doesn't even have to hire any, he doesn't have to hire any mercenaries to defend the city against the Tartarians. Sounds like she's boasting in her heart, I sit enthroned as a queen. I am not a widow, and I will never mourn. Therefore in 1 day her plagues will overtake her, and woe to you, the city of Babylon, in 1 hour your doom has come. Which is absolutely true for the city of Baldach, which is the ancient city of Babylon, because in 1 hour the doom of Babylon came from these Tartarian conquerors. And once again, cargoes of gold, precious stones, and pearls. What did they find at Baldach? Cargoes of gold, precious stones, and pearls. Woe to you, great city, who had ships on the sea and became rich through her wealth. In 1 hour she has been brought to ruin. Rejoice over her, you heavens. Rejoice, you people of God. Rejoice, apostles and prophets, for God has judged her with the judgment she opposed upon you. This rejoicing by God, the heavens, and the prophets was all carried out by the work of the Tartarians when they destroyed the city of Baldach. Then the angel picked up a boulder the size of a millstone, threw it into the sea, and said, with such violence, the city of Babylon will be thrown down, never to be found again. The music will be never heard again. The tradespeople won't be found again. The light of the lamp will never shine in you again. And the merchants of the worlds, who were important people, by your magic spell the nations were led astray. And once this city of Babylon falls, or the city of Baldach is destroyed by the Tartarians, after this I hear what sounded like the roar of a great multitude in heaven, shouting, Hallelujah! Salvation and glory to the power belongs to our God, for true and just are his judgments. So there is a huge celebration in heaven when this happened, and celebration by God and his his servants, prophets, and all of heaven essentially is celebrating hallelujah and glory to God. And the next part, going back to Genghis Khan, I saw heaven standing open, and there before me was a white horse whose rider is called Faithful and True. This has got to be Genghis Khan himself, or the white horse symbolizing these Tartarians, whose riders are called Faithful and True, because with justice he judges and wages war. And he is dressed in a robe dipped in blood, and his name is the Word of God. The armies of heaven were following him, riding on white horses dressed in fine linen, white and clean. Genghis Khan had the vision of a white horse, calling him by his name, Cengiz. The following night, all of the commanders and rulers saw the same vision of the horseman armed in white. The Tartars' weapons are the bow and arrow, which they fight very desperately. They overwhelm their enemy with a shower of arrows. The chief of their 7 tribes is clothed in white. What does Revelation say? I saw before me the white horse whose rider was called Faithful and True. The armies of heaven were following him, riding on white horses dressed in fine linen, white and clean. I looked, and there before me was a white horse. Its rider held a bow, and he was given a crown. They set a crown upon his head. So matching up the book of Revelation to the Tartarian conquerors, we have the rider on the white horse, holding a bow, given a crown, a conqueror bent on conquest, and the chief of the 7 tribes is clothed in white. The armies of heaven were dressed in fine linen, white and clean. Coming out of his mouth is a sharp sword, to which is to strike down the nations. He will rule them with an iron scepter. That's exactly what the Tartarians are doing. They've conquered all of this land. They've taken Turkey. They've taken Iran. They've taken Syria, Iraq, Baghdad, which is supposedly where ancient Babylon is located at, right down here on the pin. On his robe and his thigh has the name written, King of Kings and Lord of Lords. Boy, I would like to see what Genghis Khan's thigh looks like. I wonder if he has that written on it. But the beast was captured, and with it the false prophet who had performed the signs on its behalf. False prophet. Is this false prophet Muhammad? Because so far all of this battling going on at Babylon and between God's people seems to be the battle between Christians and Muslims. So is the false prophet mentioned here, is that Muhammad? So I was just about to get going on to chapter 3 and into Kubila Khan, but over the past day or two I realized that it looks like chapters 17, 18, and 19 are probably talking about the destruction of the city of Baldach, which happened in the year of 1258. And this is a pretty big leap in deciphering the book of Revelation, because it's only 22 chapters long, and it seems like we've identified the meaning of 3 chapters here, right in a row, 17, 18, and 19. The Babylon's fall, Babylon's doom, and this seems to be a one-to-one match to the events that occurred in 1258 with the Tartarian army destroying the Babylonian city of Baldach. So now that we've cleared that up and most likely have a correct interpretation of 3 books of Revelation, we're ready to go on to chapter 3 and Kubila Khan, the 5th emperor of the Tartarians, and that's going to be in episode 4. So I'll see you guys there. Thanks once again for watching, and God bless. Episode 4 of Tartarian Christianity, and when we left off, the Tartarians had just taken over the city of Baldach, which is the new Babylon. And the city of Baldach seems to line up perfectly with the Babylon of Revelation 17, 18, and 19. And the city of Baldach was taken in the year 1258. So before we move on to Kubila Khan, the 5th emperor of the Tartarians, I just want to cover 2 quick finds surrounding the city of Baldach, because I had tried to find it on a map. Here's Urbano Monet's flat earth map. And if we go down to Israel and the Gulf of Persia, and then we follow the river up here, we'll find Babylon. And one of these might be Baldach. It looks like here's a Bagdach and a Bolach. So one of these, probably this one, Baldach, but it has a G in it for some reason. This is likely the city of Baldach. It's right next to Babylon. And looking at the current map of Babylon, we could see it's roughly in the right area. This is ancient Babylon, and so we've got the Persian Gulf, and from there is a it's quite a small river now, but there is a river that goes all the way up
and right next to the city of ancient Babylon. Here's the ancient Babylon monument that they've built, and the river of and a river right next to it, which of course leads down to the Persian Gulf. So it's likely that this ancient Babylon is the correct area, and that the river came down here into the Persian Gulf. The same thing we can see here, the Persian Gulf and the river running up, which leads right to Babylon.
And I didn't realize in Marco Polo's book he had a chapter also on the capture and the death of the king of Baldach and the miraculous removal of a mountain. And this story covers what we've known previously. 1255, they attacked the city of Baldach and they killed the king and gave him orders to be shut up in the tower without sustenance. And there in the midst of his wealth, he finished a miserable existence. And I judge that our Lord Jesus Christ herein thought proper to avenge the wrongs of his faithful Christians so abhorred by this king. From the time he had become the king in 1225, he had persecuted the Christians and even putting them to death. And it seems like he studied the Bible where it says, if you have the faith of a mustard seed, you shall say unto a mountain, remove hence to a different place, and it shall move. And he rejoiced at this discovery because he was persuaded that it was utterly impossible. And so he gave orders for the Christians to be assembled, and he asked them if they believed whether that this text of the gospel was true or not. And they said yes, it was true. And he said, then if it's true, then give me proof of this. For certainly there's not even one among you who possess even such a small portion of faith in the Lord as to be equal to the grain of mustard. And therefore I'll give you 10 days. And through the power and prayer to Jesus, you've got to move this mountain that's right before you. And if you can't do it, then you're going to suffer the most cruel of deaths. So upon hearing these words, the Christians trembled for their lives, but nonetheless having confidence in their Redeemer that he would deliver them from their peril. So they laid down night and day on the earth, shedding tears profusely, and doing nothing except praying to the Lord. And when they did this for 8 days, a divine revelation came in a dream, directing them to a certain shoemaker who only had one eye. And this shoemaker was the only person capable of moving the mountain through divine grace. And when they found the shoemaker, he said that he didn't feel worthy of the undertaking, but he agreed to do it to help out the poor, terrified Christians. And it should be understood that he was a man of strict morals and devout conversation, having his mind pure and faithful to his God, fervent in his works of charity and rigid in the observance of fasts. It once happened to him that a beautiful young woman who came into his shop in order to have her shoes fitted, and preceding her foot, accidentally exposed a part of her leg, the beauty of which excited him momentarily, but recollecting himself, he presently dismissed her, and calling to mind the words of the gospel where it said, if thine eye offend thee, pluck it out and cast it from thee, for it is better to enter the kingdom of God with one eye than having 2 eyes and to be cast into the hellfire. He immediately, with an instrument of his trade, scooped out his right eye, evidencing by the act beyond all doubt the excellence of his faith. So I guess it's the 10th day probably, and a divine service was performed, and they put up a holy cross in front of the mountain. And the king of Baldach, sure that it was a vain ceremony on the part of the Christian, chose to be present, accompanied by a number of his guards for the purpose of killing them in the event of the failure. And here the shoemaker, kneeling before the cross, lifted up his hands to heaven, seeking his Creator that he would compassionately look down upon earth for the glory and excellence of his name, as well as for the support and the confirmation of the Christian faith, that God would lend assistance to his people in the accomplishment of the task imposed before them and manifest his power. Having concluded his prayer, he cried in a loud voice, in the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Ghost, I command thee, O mountain, to remove you thyself. And upon these words being uttered, the mountain moved, and the earth at the same time trembled in a wonderful and alarming manner. The king and all of his guards and everybody who was there was struck with terror and remained in a state of stupefaction. Many later became Christians. Even the king secretly embraced Christianity, always wearing a cross concealed under his garment, which after his death was found upon him, and on this account it was that they did not put him in a tomb in the shrine of his predecessors. So it sounds as though when this king of Baldach died,
and he was locked up in a tower and only given golden pearls to eat. After they found his body, it sounds as though concealed underneath of his garment, they found a Christian cross, even though he was teaching Islam. Okay, so now that we've covered a little bit more history on the city of Baldach, and it sounds like there was a literal moving of a mountain at that location. And I don't know if there's any connections between that story and the book of Revelation, but we should note that under the reign of the king of Baldach, and it seems as though this is his name, Mostasim Bela, and according to this, his reign began in 1242, but he was put to death in 1258, which is the year the city of Baldach was taken. So just to put a name to this king that we've been talking about, and I don't know if there's any connection to the book of Revelation, but we can see that the Christians are being persecuted by this king of Baldach. He is putting Christians to death. And in one case of Christian persecution, he tells them that they have to move a mountain, and he gives them 10 days. And the church of Smyrna is prosecuted. The angel says, "Do not be afraid of what you are about to suffer. I tell you, the devil will put you in prison and test you, and you will suffer persecution for 10 days. Be faithful even to the point of death, and I will give you life as your victor's crown." And man, what a pretty close match that these Christians suffer persecution for 10 days, right up to the point of death. But God says, "Be faithful, and I will give you life as your victor's crown." And the king of Baldach, Mostam Bela, which seems to have what Revelation would call a synagogue of Satan, is persecuting Christians and putting them to death. And when he captures them, he gives them a test in which they must move a mountain, and he gives them 10 days to get it done. Well, that's a pretty good match for the Christians who, according to Marco Polo, were tested that they move a mountain. And it appears here that, according to this historical account of Marco Polo, they were successful. So before this turns into a complete series on the city of Baldach, let's push forward and see what comes next with Kublai Khan, who's the 5th emperor of the Tartarians. And what had just happened was Halu Khan, one of the descendants of Genghis Khan, who was the king of Tartaria, was just about to take Jerusalem and free the Holy Land from the pagans so that he could restore it to the Christians. But he was brought news that his brother Mango Khan had passed away, and Tartaria needed a successor. So Halun could no longer go into Jerusalem in person, so he left 10,000 Tartars to keep the kingdom of Syria under the command of a captain called Giuboga. Now, Giuboga is a descendant of the wise men, the 3 wise men who brought presents to baby Jesus when he was born. Giuboga is of the family line of the 3 kings that came to worship the nativity of Christ. So this guy is a literal descendant of the 3 wise men, and we know, of course, at this point that the 3 wise men were all Tartarians who went and seen baby Jesus. So Tartarian Captain Giuboga was left on the doorstep of Israel and Jerusalem right here in Syria because the Tartarians have already conquered Iraq, Babylon, Iran, and Castle Tigado, and Turkey. They're friends with Armenia, who are also a Christian nation. So basically all of this area is Tartarian land at this point. Of course, northern Asia, all the northern land is all Tartary. But they've now taken Lower Asia and are in Syria on the doorstep of Jerusalem, getting ready to take back the Holy Land. Of course, Halun has now had to head north back up into Tartaria to take the Tartarian crown as Mango Khan has passed away. But while Halun was headed north, he heard that the nobles and princes had placed his brother Kublai Khan in the imperial seat of the Tartars. And he heard this while he was at Taurus. And he understood that Barkat, or Barcha, was marching with a great army
with the purpose of making himself the emperor. Halun therefore assembled his people and met with his enemies, the enemies of Barcha, on a certain river which was frozen, and they began a great battle. But the ice being broken by the great multitude of horses and men, there was drowned on one side and the other 30,000 Tartars, insomuch that the armies on each side returned. So you've got Tartarians fighting Tartarians. It is Halun's army against Barcha's army. Of course, they're both Tartarians. But Gilboga, who Halun had left in the kingdom of Syria and loved Christians well, he was of the progeny of the three kings who went to worship the nativity of the Lord. And he had labored earnestly to get the Holy Land again under the power of the Christians. But the devil sowed some seed and a scandal and discord between him and the Christians of those parts. And it happened in this manner. In the land of Belfort, there was a lot of towns and villages inhabited by Muslims. And they paid tribute to the Tartars. And some Christians from Sidon and Belfort made off with a bunch of spoils by killing a great number of Muslims and carrying away captive with a great drove of cattle. A nephew of Gilboga, remaining thereabout, followed speedily after those Christians that had committed those outrages to tell them on behalf of his uncle that they should dismiss their booty. So Gilboga, who is of the family of the three wise men who went to see baby Jesus, his nephew had seen these Christians killing the Muslims and stealing their cattle. And he went and told them that they need to dismiss their booty and essentially stop doing their evil crimes. But some of them, unwilling to part with their prey they had taken, ran upon him and killed him with a bunch of other Tartarians that accompanied him. Gilboga then heard that the Christians had slain his nephew, and he presently took the city of Sidon, dismantled the walls thereof, and slew a few of the Christians, the rest saving themselves on an island. And after this, the Tartars would not trust the Christians of Syria, and neither would the Christians of Syria put their confidence in the Tartars, whom afterwards were driven out of the kingdom of Syria by Muslims, as shall be declared. So while this was going on, Halun was busy in war with Barkat, the guy who had a great army and was trying to make himself emperor of Tartaria. So Halun couldn't help out Gilboga, and while this was going on, the king of Egypt assembled an army and came to Palestine and joined the battle with Gilboga and his Tartars, and Gilboga was slain. And I thought I'd pull Palestine up on the map real quick, so I did a search for it on Google Maps. And it takes me to the middle of the ocean over here. And it says that Palestine, officially recognized as the state of Palestine. Okay, so this is the right mark, and no joke, Google Earth has Palestine underneath of the ocean. I wonder who at Google and what nation they might be from decided to put Palestine in the middle of the ocean. That's really strange. Let me search for the state of Palestine. Same thing. It's Google Earth has it in the middle of the ocean. Isn't that strange? They want those guys buried underwater and their continent lost in history. There's a certain people with the 4 letters. It starts with the J, and they are the tribes of Benjamin and Judah. They would want Palestine over here. So strange that Google Maps has Palestine literally in the ocean underwater now. Funny when Wikipedia is more accurate than Google Earth, but Wikipedia shows where the state of Palestine is. It's this green area and this green area, which we could see in these red zones. So these red zones are Palestine. It's hard to say exactly where this battle is going on in the province of Palestina, but it's certainly somewhere very close to the Holy Land. And the Egyptian army has come up to fight with Gilboga, and they've killed Gilboga somewhere around Syria or Palestine, somewhere in this area. And the Tartars, Gilboga was slain, and his army was defeated. The Tartars escaped and went into Armenia, by this means the kingdom of Syria was wholly subdued by Muslims.
So the Tartars have escaped, left Syria and gone into Armenia. And Syria, although they were just on the doorstep of the Holy Land, they've been driven back by the Muslims to Armenia.
Now when Halun understood that the king of Egypt had invaded Syria and had driven out his people, he gathered his army and sent for the king of Armenia and the king of Georgia and some other Christians of the east to prepare themselves against the king of Egypt and the Muslims. And when his army was ready, a sickness seized him, and he languished the space of a fortnight and then died, by whose death the enterprise of the Holy Land had an end. So now Halun has died from a sickness. And the war to the enterprise to take back the Holy Land from the hands of the pagans has come to an end. And the emperor of Tartaria, who was temporarily holding the throne, Kublai Khan, had been taken care of Halun's son named Abaga. So once Halun had died, Kublai Khan went ahead and gave the throne to Abaga Khan, and his reign began in the year of our Lord 1264. Now Kublai Khan was the 5th emperor of the Tartarians, and he inherited the throne when Mango Khan passed away. The honorable heir to the throne was Gilboga, but Gilboga was busy in war and never made it back to Tartaria to accept the throne. So the 4th emperor was Mango Khan, the 5th emperor was Kublai Khan. Now when Marco Polo was in Tartaria, Kublai Khan or Kublai Khan was the emperor who was reigning. So book 2 starts off with describing that. The admiral deeds of Kublai Khan or Kublai Khan, the emperor now reigning. So Kublai Khan, it is to be understood, is the lineal and legitimate descendant of Genghis Khan, the 1st emperor, and the rightful sovereign of the Tartars. He is the 6th Grand Khan and began his reign in the year 1256. So Kublai Khan or Kublai Khan reigned from 1256 until 1264, so 8 years total, when he passed the throne to Abaga Khan. Now earlier in the series we were looking at Revelation chapter 19, where it talks about the armies of heaven riding on white horses and dressed in fine linen, white and clean. Well, the Tartarians wore fine linen, white and clean, and they rode on horses. And what seems to perhaps be talking about Genghis Khan, it says he will rule with an iron scepter, and he will tread the winepress of the fury of the wrath of God Almighty. On his robe and on his thigh is written the name King of Kings and Lord of Lords. Quite interesting to note that Khan means Khan of Khans or Lord of Lords. So King of Kings or Lord of Lords, isn't that an exact match for Revelation 19, King of Kings and Lord of Lords? It's the same exact thing. I wonder if it's written on his robe. I found mention here that his name is written in gold letters and laid up in the temples of the metropolitan city, but it didn't say anywhere here that it's necessarily written on his robe or written on his thigh. But quite interesting that Khan, K-A-A-N, means Khan of Khans or Lord of Lords, King of Kings or Lord of Lords, and that's the exact words of what we find in Revelation. So once Halun had died, Kublai Khan went ahead and gave the throne to Abaga Khan, and his reign began in the year of our Lord 1264. So it's 1264. Halun has died. His brother Kublai Khan, who was temporarily in the throne, has passed the Tartarian crown to Abaga Khan, and Abaga Khan is now the king of Tartaria. So the new king of Tartaria of 1264, Abaga, was wise and governed prosperously in all things, with 2 exceptions. He would not be a Christian as his father was, and he worshipped idols and believed in idolatrous priests. And he was also always in war with his neighbors. And so by this, the power of the Muslims increased much. And the Christians lost the city of Antioch and diverse other places of strength which they held in the kingdom. And the Muslims thereby wasted and spoiled all of the kingdom of Armenia and carried infinite riches there, to the great damage of the Christians. And the power of the enemy was much increased, and the kingdom of Armenia weakened wondrously. And the king of Armenia asked the Tartarian king Abaga if he could help him overthrow the faithless Muslims to the relief of the Christians. But Abaga refused because he was in daily battles with his neighbors. So this change in Tartarians from being a Christian nation bent on conquering the Holy Land and getting it back into the hands of the Christians seems to be starting with Genghis Khan and the White Horse riding out and conquer, bent on conquest. And it's possible that this change where they have now turned their back on God and the king is not a Christian and he's really just helping the Muslims out. This may be the second seal where another horse comes out, a fiery red one, and its rider was given power to take peace from the earth and to make people kill each other. And to him was given a large sword. So maybe this is the second seal being opened. And the king of Armenia has passed away, and he's given the kingdom to his son Livon. And this new king of Armenia was wise and governed his kingdom providently, and was loved much by his own people and by the Tartars. And he labored earnestly to destroy the Muslims. And in time, Abaga made peace with all his neighbors, which he had been enemies for a long time. So it sounds like now the Tartarian king Abaga has made peace with the king of Armenia, Livon. And the king of Egypt entered the kingdom of Turkey and slew many of the Tartars and drove them out of many towns. And a Muslim called Parvana, being captain over the Tartars that were in Turkey, rebelled against Abaga and sought the destruction of the Tartarians. So the Tartarians currently have Turkey. And of course, this is where the 7 churches of Revelation are at. And going to older maps, the country of Turkey looks a bit smaller. Here's Cairo, Egypt. So the Holy Land would be right here. We can see Pergamum. I wasn't able to find all of the 7 churches, but definitely Pergamum here. This area is owned by Tartarians, and the Tartarian captain here has turned his back and betrayed the king. And he's decided that he wants to destroy the Tartarians. Captain Parvana rebelled against Abaga, seeking the destruction of the Tartarians. Abaga, hearing thereof, posted so speedily that in 15 days he rode 40 days' journey. And the king of Egypt, hearing of his coming, departed suddenly, not daring to stay any longer. But he wasn't fast enough to get away, so the Tartars, following swiftly, overtook his army and the entirety of the kingdom of Egypt in a place called Pas Blanque. There the Tartarians, rushing onto them, took 2,000 horsemen of the Muslims, besides much riches, 5,000 of the people who lived in the country. And then Abaga came to the edges of Egypt and was persuaded he couldn't go any further because of the heat. The land was too hot, and his Tartars, having their beasts come speedily from far, could hardly endure the heat. They're not on camels or anything. They're on some northern horses who can't stand the heat. So by this reason, they returned into Turkey and spoiled and wasted all the countries that had rebelled and that had yielded to the king of Egypt. But he caused that traitor Parvana and his partakers to be cut asunder in the midst after the Tartarian manner, and a part of his flesh to be served in all his meats, whereas he and his captains did eat. Such was the revenge of King Abaga on the traitor Parvana. Now, King Abaga isn't necessarily a Christian king. In fact, he's been helping the Muslims the majority of his reign, until just recently when he's made a friendship with the king of Armenia. And he's now taken a fight against the Muslims and the king of Egypt. But he is here, of course, engaged in cannibalism, eating a part of the flesh. It seems like one of the worst things you could do to a traitor is cut them up the way the Tartarians cut them up, and then serve them in their meats, whereas the captains and the king Abaga did eat. And there's a couple mentions of flesh eating in Revelations, and we had mentioned this earlier in the series, but the Babylon, when Babylon was overtaken, it says the beast and the 10 horns of the 10 tribes of Israel hate the city of Babylon. They will bring her to ruin and leave her naked. They will eat her flesh and burn her with fire. So this part where it says that they will eat her flesh is very, I mean, that is what the Tartarians do when they take over, at least a bad guy like Parvana. They kill him and they eat their flesh. Just above that, Revelations 19:17, I saw an angel standing in the sun who cried in a loud voice to all the birds flying in the midair, "Come, gather together for a great supper of God, so that you may eat the flesh of kings, generals." So, here it looks like he's talking to the birds, but he is telling them that you're going to eat the flesh of kings and generals. It just seems that the person, John, who wrote Revelation, was familiar with the eating of flesh of, a king or a general when they're killed by an opposing army. Now, this traitor Parvana seems to be a certain chief named Nayan, who, although only 30 years of age, was kinsman to Kublai, and had succeeded to the dominion of many cities and provinces, which enabled him to bring into the field an army of 400,000 horse. Because of youthful vanity and finding himself at the head of such a great force, he formed in the year 1286 an army usurping the sovereignty, or, he's a Tartarian kinsman of Kublai who has turned against the other Tartarians. Having formed his army, the Grand Khan proceeded towards the territory of Nayan and continued day and night, and he reached it in 25 days, so prudently that neither the prince himself, Nayan, nor any of his dependents are aware of it, and all the roads being guarded in such a manner that no persons who attempted to pass could escape being made prisoners. So they surrounded the whole city, and they couldn't even escape if they wanted to. At that point, Kublai halted his troops and allowed them to rest for 2 days. And confident, therefore, of their success, they ascended the hill the next morning and presented themselves before the army of Nayan, which they found negligently posted without advance parties or scouts, while the chief himself was asleep in his tent, accompanied by one of his wives. But here comes Kublai Khan in a large wooden castle borne on the backs of 4 elephants, whose bodies were protected with coverings of thick leather hardened by fire, over which they housed cloth of gold, which is a white linen cloth with gold entwined in it. The castle contained many crossbowmen and archers, and at the top of it was hoisted the imperial standard adorned with representations of the sun and the moon. His army consisted of 30 battalions of horse. Each battalion had 10,000 men armed with bows, so 30 multiplied by 10,000, so there's 300,000 men, which form the left and right wings, and they outflanked the army of the Nayan. In front of each battalion of horse was placed 500 infantry. So once again, we could do 500 times 30, and there's another 15,000 men in front of there with short lances and swords. And this was the only historical picture I could find of this. Now, this is an engraving from 1837. So this is just somebody who had read about Kublai Khan and the 4-elephant war castle. And he, drew what he thought it looked like. So he certainly wasn't there. And when I read of the 4-elephant war castle, it sounded to me like 4 elephants in a square arrangement, rather than 4 of them lined up linearly. But, I imagine 1, 2, 3, 4 in a square shape, and then a big castle in the middle of those 4 elephants. And I'll bet it was a lot bigger than this. This makes it look almost somewhat small. But when it's talking about a large wooden castle borne on the backs of 4 elephants, this thing sounds pretty crazy. And they had an infinite number of wind instruments of various kinds that were sounded, succeeded by songs according to the customs of the Tartars before they engage in a fight, which commences upon the signal given by the cymbals and drums, and there was such a beating of the cymbals and drums and such a singing that it was wonderful to hear. I think that Marco Polo was present for this. This signal, by the orders of the Grand Khan, was given to the right and the left wings, and then a fierce and bloody conflict began, and the air was instantly filled with a cloud of arrows that poured down on every side. Vast numbers of men and horses were seen falling to the ground, and the loud cries of the shouts of men, together with the noises of the horses and the weapons, were such to inspire terror in those who heard them. When the arrows had been discharged, the hostile parties engaged in close combat with their lances, swords, and maces shod with iron. Such was the slaughter, so large were the heaps of carcasses of men, and more especially of horses on the field, that it became impossible for one party to advance upon the other. Thus the fortune of the day remained for a long time undecided, and victory wavered between the contending parties from morning to till noon. At length, however, Nyan perceived that he was nearly surrounded, attempted to save himself by flight, but was presently made prisoner and conducted to the presence of Kublai, who gave orders for his being put to death, and his execution was carried out by placing him between two carpets which were violently shaken until the spirit had departed from the body. The motive for this particular sentence being that the son and heir should not witness the shedding of blood of one who belonged to the imperial family. Nyan had privately undergone a ceremony of baptism, but never had made an open profession of Christianity, but thought proper on this occasion to bear a sign of a cross in his banners. And in his army was a vast number of Christians who were left among the slain. Now when the Jews and the Muslims heard that a banner with the cross of Christ had been overthrown, they taunted the Christian inhabitants, saying, "Behold the state of which your banners and your people have been reduced." And the Christians complained to the Grand Khan, who said if the cross of Christ did not prove advantageous to the party of Nyan, then they were rebels and were traitors to the Lord, and they could not afford his protection. After this victory, the Grand Khan returned to the capital city of Kanbalu, and he continued to reside there in the months of February and March, in the latter which was the festival of Easter. And being aware that this was one of our principal solemn days, he commanded all the Christians to attend him and to bring with them their book, which contains the four Gospels of the evangelists, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And after causing it to be repeatedly perfumed with incense in a ceremonious manner, he devoutly kissed it, and directed that the same should be done by all his nobles who were present. This was his usual practice upon each of the principal Christian festivals, such as Easter and Christmas, and he observed the same at the festivals of the Muslims, Jews, and idolaters. Upon being asked about this conduct, he said there are four great prophets who are reverenced and worshipped by different classes of mankind. The Christians regard Jesus Christ as God, the Saccharans Muhammad, the Jews Moses, and the idolaters Sogomambar Khan. And this is probably corrupted by transcribers, and it's probably Buddha or Fo, who amongst the Mongols in India is commonly called Shakyamuni, and in Siam Somona Kondom. So Christians for Jesus, Muslims for Muhammad, Jews for Moses, and Buddhists for Buddha. But who knows, this could also be the Satan worshippers and some name for Satyanaka. I do honor and show respect to all the four, and invoke to my aid whichever among them is truth supreme in heaven. But from the manner in which His Majesty acted towards them, it is evident that he regarded the faith of the Christians as the truest and the best. By no means, however, he would permit them to bear a cross before them, because it is exalting the means by which Christ was put to death. So he didn't want anybody, wearing a cross around their neck or showing a cross anywhere, because it was, in a way, glorifying the death of Jesus Christ. It may be perhaps asked by some why, if he showed such a presence to the faith of Christ, did he not conform to it and become a Christian? And his reason for not doing so: "Wherefore," he said, "why should I become a Christian? You yourselves must perceive that Christians of these countries are ignorant, ineffective persons, and do not possess the faculty of performing anything miraculous. Whereas you can see that the idolaters can do whatever they will. When I sit at a table, the cups that were in the middle of the hall come to me filled with wine and other beverages, spontaneously and without being touched by human hand, and I drink from them." So this guy definitely is witnessing some miracles of cups being filled up with wine in some supernatural manner. But he's saying that the idolaters do that. So that's why I say when he says the idolaters are Buddhists, I'm not sure they're Buddhists, because this sounds more like Satan worshippers and some kind of Satyanika or being from the evil side of the spirit world. Now, on the note of cups being filled up or beverage being supplied supernaturally, I will say I personally know a Christian pastor who was previously worshiping Satan, and he said that at one point he demanded that a demon bring him a 12-pack of Coke, and all of a sudden a 12-pack of Coke appeared on the kitchen counter. So it's interesting that there's even Jesus turning water into wine, and there's some kind of recurring theme with these beings of the spirit realm miraculously providing drink even to this day with a 12-pack of Coke. Now, in addition to supernaturally filling cups with wine, they also have the power of controlling bad weather and obliging it to retire to any quarter of the heavens. And you are also witnesses that their idols have the ability to speak and predict to them whatever is required. So these evil idols, which I don't think is Buddha, I don't think a statue of Buddha is speaking. That sounds more like, some kind of a golden cow or something like that. But he says, should I become a convert to the faith of Christ and profess myself a Christian, the nobles of my court and other persons who do not incline to that religion will ask me what sufficient motives have caused me to receive baptism and embrace Christianity. What extraordinary powers do they say? What miracles have been displayed by its ministers? While the idolaters, by means of their profound art, witchcraft, can effect such wonders, may without difficulty compass my death. So he's saying, the idolaters can cast a spell or do some witchcraft to kill me. And the Christians say that they themselves are endowed with the similar art, but which they refrain from exercising because it is derived from the agency of evil spirits. So they know that, this type of witchcraft does come from evil spirits. And he basically says, send 100 persons well skilled in Christianity who can confront the idolaters and show that they have more power than them. And when I'm witness of this, then I'll allow myself to be baptized, and following my example, all my nobility will in like manner receive baptism, and this will be imitated by all my subjects in general, so that Christians of these parts will exceed in number those who inhabit your own country. The Grand Khan appoints 12 of his most intelligent among his nobles, just like Jesus Christ had 12 disciples. Now this is where it gets a little interesting. It's describing the great and admirable palace of the Grand Khan near the city of Kanbalu, which is in the northeastern extremity of the province of Cathay. Now this city seems to be right here, Kanbalu, Cathay, a metropolis with a habit of 28 million. That would be this big red city right here. So that looks about the middle of Cathay, but it says in the northeastern. Here is Cathay, and of course Arzareth, where the 10 tribes of Israel were sent. And of the original 10 tribes, they didn't go very far to get to the city of Kanbalu. Here is Kanbalu on this map. And of course it's very, very close to Arzareth. Kanbalu, metropolis with a habitat of 28 million. At first I thought it was 2.8 million, but it says 28 million, both on this map and on this one. Now, to give a frame of reference, here are the largest cities in the world right now. Tokyo, Japan is number 1 with 37 million. And number 2 is Delhi, India with 28 million. Seoul, South Korea has 25 million, so that's not as big as Kanbalu. Kanbalu is the exact size of Delhi, India, 28 million. Just to give you an idea of how big this city of Kanbalu was. Has as many people as Delhi, India does modern day. So the elites and scientists want to talk about overpopulation of Earth right now because we have a city with 28 million people. Well, there was, we go back 800 years to the year 1200. We had cities this big back then, no problem. And also when they talk about their armies, they'll say they have an army of 500,000 men like it's nothing. And I could see why. There is a vast population in Tartaria, the size of Delhi, India, up here at Kambalu. And with the zoomed out view, here is Kambalu here. Definitely in the northeastern part of Tartaria. And here is Kambalu right here in the northeastern part of Tartaria, right next to Tenduk. Urbano Monti's map has Arzareth up here. And just a little bit south, we have Cathay, or Cathio. And in the middle of that, we've got the Kambalu region. And here is the huge city of Kambalu. Looks like it's on top of a river, or a river's going through the city. But very close, once again, to Arzareth. And the Jews have their holy city, Jerusalem. But that's only 2 of the 12 tribes. And the other 10 tribes of Israel have, they came up here to Arzareth. So if they were to have a holy city, it would certainly be Kambalu. This is the largest city in the area, close to their home of Arzareth. And I've also heard theories that perhaps the original Jerusalem was in Moscow, or somewhere in Tartaria. Maybe the original Jerusalem was in Kambalu, or maybe this is the second Jerusalem, or at least the holy city of the lost 10 tribes. That's why when Marco Polo started describing the great city of Kambalu, and it says that it's a square, and each side of the square is 8 miles in length, and in Revelation there's the New Jerusalem. So there's a new holy city coming down out of heaven from God, and he measured it out like a square. It's as long as it is wide. So I was paying attention to the description here, and it's not quite an exact match. And it has a great high wall with 12 gates, with the 12 angels at the gates, and on the gates are written the names of the 12 tribes of Israel, and 3 gates on the east, 3 on the north, 3 on the south, and 3 on the west. So it says it has a second wall enclosing a square of 6 miles, has 3 gates on the south, 3 on the north. Okay, but it doesn't have 3 on the west or 3 on the east. So I thought, okay, well that can't be the right city. But it turns out this is the old city. And it says here, this is on the southern side of the new city. Okay, so I turned the page, and that's when we get the new city of Taidu, built near Kambalu. The city of Kambalu is situated near a large river in the province of Cathay. It was in ancient times eminently magnificent and royal. The name itself implies the city of the sovereign. The new and old cities are separated from each other only by the stream that runs between them. And the newly built city received the name Taidu, and all the Cathians, who were inhabitants of the old ancient city, took their abode to the new one. Okay, so we have a new city, just like the Revelation talks about a new Jerusalem, and this one forms a perfect square, just like the new Jerusalem from Revelation. It's 24 miles in extent, with each side being 6 miles. And that doesn't seem to line up with the 12,000 stadia square that makes up the New Jerusalem. But it's hard to say if we know exactly what 12,000 stadia is. Just like the New Jerusalem, this is also enclosed with walls that are about 10 paces thick. And the whole plan of the city is regularly laid out by line. The streets are generally consequently so straight that when a person ascends over the wall on one of the gates and looks forward, he can see the gate on the opposite side of the city from him. So it has perfect geometry, and the allotments of ground throughout the city are square exactly in one line with each other, so as to resemble a chessboard and planned out with a degree of precision and beauty impossible to describe. The wall of the city has 12 gates, 3 on each side of the square. And over each gate and compartment of the wall there is a handsome building, and every gate is guarded by 1,000 men. So 12 gates, 3 on each side. It's a perfect square. The New Jerusalem, the new city, has 12 gates, and there are 3 gates on the east, 3 on the north, 3 on the south, and 3 on the west. The city's laid out was a square as long as it is wide. So could this city of Taidu, which is at the same exact location of Kambalu, it sounds like the old city's on one side and the new city is on the other side. Could this new city be the New Jerusalem described in the book of Revelation? Is it possible that they may have put the names of the 12 tribes of Israel on each of their gates? A perfectly square new city with 3 gates on the north, south, east, and west. Coincidence? Maybe. Alright, so jumping back into the timeline where we left off with Trader Purvana. The year is 1264. Kobila Khan has passed the throne to Abaga Khan, and one of the Tartarians down in Turkey had rebelled against his brethren, his fellow Tartarians, and Abaga Khan went down to Turkey and has killed him. But King Abaga, having conquered Turkey and enriching his Tartars with the spoils of the rebellious Muslims, called the king of Armenia and offered him the kingdom of Turkey, in regard that his father and he had always been faithful to the Tartarians. But the king of Armenia, being discreet and wise, rendered great thanks to Abaga, but he said no because he would be unable to govern 2 kingdoms at once. So the king of Armenia was worried that there was going to be a rebellion in Turkey by the Muslims, and so he didn't want to permit any Muslim to be in command there. And with this advice, Abaga accepted it, and he never allowed any Muslim to rule in Turkey. And the king of Armenia then asked him to think about delivering the Holy Land out of the hands of the pagans, and Abaga promised that he would with his best endeavor. So once Abaga had taken care of all these affairs in Turkey, he then returned to the kingdom of Khorasan, where he had left his family. And when the Tartarian king Abaga understood that all of this happened, he was ready to set forward with his power against the Muslims. But a certain Muslim, the son of the devil, came to the kingdom of Persia, prevailed by giving great gifts to some people who served near King Abaga, and by giving these gifts, King Abaga and his brother Mangodanor were poisoned, both on the same day. They both died within 8 days afterwards. So died Abaga Khan in the year of the Lord 1282. After Abaga had been poisoned, the Tartars assembled themselves and ordained over them a brother of his called Tengodor. And in his youth he had received the sacrament of baptism, Christian baptism, but in his later years he kept the company of Muslims whom he loved, and he became a wicked Muslim, renouncing the Christian religion, and he would be called Muhammad Khan, and labored by all means to turn all the Tartarians to the irreligious sect of Islam, that son of iniquity. And the ones that he couldn't compel by violence, he allured by preferred treatment and rewards, inasmuch that in his time many of the Tartarians became professed Muslims, as they appear at this day. This evil child commanded that the churches of the Christians be destroyed and forbid them of any of their religious rites or ceremonies. He caused the doctrine of Islam to be publicly preached, the Christians to be banished, their churches in the city of Taurus utterly destroyed. He sent his messengers to the king of Egypt and concluded a peace with him, promising that all the Christians in his dominion will become Muslims or else lose their heads, which gave the Muslims cause for much rejoicing, and it made the Christians very sad. He then sent for the king of Armenia and Georgia, and to other Christian princes of those parts to come to him without delay. But they resolved rather to die in battle than to obey his commandment. And the Christians being now in such anguish and bitterness of heart that they rather desired to die than to live. Revelation chapter 9, during those days people will seek death, but will not find it. They will long to die, but death will elude them. But a brother of this Muhammad Khan and his nephew called Argon rebelled against Muhammad Khan, and they said, "You have forsaken the steps of our ancestors, and you have become a wicked Muslim, laboring with all your might to bring the rest of the Tartars to be Muslims also." And they told Muhammad Khan to reform his evil ways, otherwise they would proceed against him. And when Muhammad Khan had heard this, he proceeded with wrath, and he caused his brother to be slain, and he intended to do the same to his nephew. And he went against him with a mighty army, and Argon, being not of strength to withstand his forces, went back into a stronghold in the mountains. And that son of iniquity, Muhammad Khan, besieged him with a devilish army. Argon finally yielded himself with the condition that he might still enjoy his dignity and dominion, but Muhammad decided that he must be kept in prison, so he appointed an army, the constable, which he trusted so much, to put his nephew to death secretly and to bring him his head. So Muhammad Khan had captured this nephew Argon, and he said he was just going to put him in prison, but instead he secretly told his constable to behead him and to bring him his head. Now, one of those who had received the command of this bloody execution was a man of some place in authority, and he was brought up under Abaga, the father of Argon. So having compassion at Argon's distress, he took arms and in the night slew the constable of Muhammad and all of his followers. And then he freed Argon and made him lord and ruler of all. Argon, thus being freed, accompanied with his faithful followers, pursued after Muhammad, whom he overtook and seized before he came to Taurus, and he caused him, after their manner, to be cut asunder in the midst. And such was the end of the cursed Muhammad before he had even sat 2 years in his seat. And when they say they caused him to be cut asunder in the midst after the Tartarian manner, it's very likely that this Muhammad Khan was also eaten, because last time they had cut asunder in the midst a Tartarian captain, they also had eaten his meat. So once again, Argon has conquered Mohammedan Christianity, has won over Islam, and it seems at this point that the Tartarians, with Argon being the king, are once again a Christian nation. Marco Polo on the battle between Argon and Akomat. The next morning, Argon, having called his men to arms and drawing them up skillfully in order to battle, advanced towards the enemy, and Akomat, who was the Muslim, had done the same, and the two of the armies met and engaged without further parley. The battle began with a shower of arrows so thick that it seems like rain from heaven, that you might see everywhere the riders cast from their horses, and cries and groans of those who lay on the earth mortally wounded were dreadful to hear. When they had exhausted their arrows, they took their swords and clubs, and the battle became so fierce that the noise so great that you could hardly have heard God's thunder. The slaughter was great on both sides, but at last, though Argon himself displayed extraordinary valor and set an example to all his men, it was in vain, and fortune turned against him, and his men were compelled to flee, closely pursued by Akomat and his men, who made a great havoc of them. And in the flight Argon himself was captured, and upon which the pursuit was abandoned, and the victors returned to their camp and their tents, glad beyond measure. Akomat caused his nephew Argon to be confined and closely guarded, and being a man given to his pleasures, he returned to his court to enjoy the society of the fair ladies who were there, leaving the command of the army to a chief, with strict orders to keep Argon closely guarded and to follow him to court by short marches, as not to fatigue his men. And it happened that a great Tartar baron, who was of a great age, took pity on Argon, and said to himself, "What great wickedness and disloyalty to hold their lord a prisoner," and he would do his best to set him free. He began persuading many of the other barons to adopt the same sentiment, and his personal influence, on account of his age and known character for justice and wisdom was so great that he easily gained them over to his enterprise, and they promised to be directed by him. The name of the leader of this enterprise was Boga, and with his fellow conspirators, they went to the tent where Argon was confined and told him that they repented for the part they had taken against him, and that in reparation of the error they had made, they had come to set him free and take them for their lord. And when Argon was set free, they started marching towards the court where Acomat was at in his principal palace, making great festivity. And a messenger came to him and said, "Sir, I bring you news, nothing good, but very evil. Know that the barons have delivered Argon and raised him to sovereignty, and have slain Soldan, your dear friend, and I assure you that they are hastingly hither to slay you." And when Acomat heard this, he at first was so overcome with astonishment and fear that he knew not what to do or say. So he told the messenger to mention to nobody the news, and he ordered his most trusty followers to arm up on their horses, and without telling anybody where they were going, they were going to try to escape and save his life. And after 6 days of fleeing, he came to a pass where he was arrested, and the keeper of that pass was a zealous partisan of Aragon, and he told him that all the treasure in the world would not hinder him from doing his duty towards his rightful lord. And he accordingly placed Acomat under strong guard and marching him to the court. And he arrived there in just 3 days after Aragon had taken possession of it. So Aragon had in the meantime taken control of the city, and he didn't find Acomat because Acomat had fled. But 3 days after he had captured the city, this keeper of the pass came back to the city with Acomat, and Acomat was delivered to him a prisoner. And without consulting anybody, Aragon ordered that one of his men slay his uncle and throw his body into such a place as it would never be seen again, which order was immediately executed. Thus ended the affair between Aragon and his uncle Acomat. And with Aragon being victorious over Muhammad, that brings an end to chapter 3 here. And the next chapter is chapter 4, which is starting off in the year of our Lord 1285. But those first 3 chapters cover about a 100-year period from Genghis Khan up to the year 1285. That's about a 100-year period. So this will be a great spot to end episode number 4. And I want to end with just one Bible verse out of Matthew chapter 24. And here it says, "For as the lightning comes from the east and shines even unto the west, so shall the coming of the Son of Man be." So it says that when Jesus comes back, it'll be as lightning coming out of the east and shining onto the west. And there's a few things that could be associated with lightning. One of them is speed. Lightning is very fast. And it also brings light. Of course, light is in the word itself, but it brings light, and it's very fast. It comes from the east and goes to the west. And that seems to be a pretty good match for the Tartarians, who had been sent east over the Euphrates River, and God had opened up a channel in the Euphrates River so they could pass into Arzareth. And he said in 4 Esdras, at the end of times, I will hold the water once again, and you'll be able to come back, of course, this time coming to the west. So when Genghis Khan spread out from his home of Arzareth into the rest of the world, overtaking Tartaria, all of Asia and Lower Asia, and the Tartars, which in the year 1228, under the command of Genghis Khan, overspread the earth like a flood, the successors of the 10 tribes of Israel. This overspreading the world like a flood seems to be something that happened very fast, such as lightning, and they also came from the east, and they shine onto the west, if you want to call it shining. They spread Christianity from the east in Arzareth and Tinduk onto the west, into the rest of Asia and Tartaria, even down into southern Asia and the entire earth. We find star forts, for example, in South America and all over the entire earth. So once again, thank you for watching. This has been a particularly long episode, and I'll see you guys in the next one.